And welcome back for another day of Creator Spotlight. This week is VR week. So I'm super excited to be introducing another great VR game. Today we're checking out something completely different than yesterday. It's a stealth VR game set in feudal Japan. You get to play as the shinobi assassin, which of course, what kid didn't grow up wanting to be a shinobi assassin? And there's of course a dog, which is crucial. But if you haven't checked it out yet, yesterday we had a Township Tale. Really wonderful stream with the great folks over at Alta. Definitely go check it out. The VOD's available down there somewhere. So go take a look at it. They gave us a great crib tour of their game, which is like an RPG, crafting, cooking, awesomeness kind of game. And then tomorrow we'll also be checking out a VR MMO. Very ambitious game from a great team that will be showing us how they created everything, all the different mechanics that they have, all the different... What else are they checking out, Hassan? There's like a lot of really good stuff that we're doing for tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. So many good things. It's like one of those... unbelievable. It's like a 10-person team working on an MMO in VR. Just a gargantuan task.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyways, but before we head to that, Hassan, why don't you tell us what we should be looking out for this week?
Yeah, so if you're checking out the asset store, let's just jump to my screen. A little bit about the sale that's on the asset store right now. So we have a mega bundle to prototype your project, right? So this works a little bit like any humble bundle sale would work, where you have 3 tiers of bundles. For $9.99, you can get starter assets to help get your character going, your character moving around, some prop tools and state solutions. For $14.99, you can get some guns and weapons and projectiles to help maybe build a little prototype of an action scene. And then for $19.99, you can get all the listed assets, including some environment assets, some character movement assets, and things for enemy line of sight and more particle effect packs, like this pretty cool spell pack over here. And I think this is actually super relevant to the stream we have today, because the developers we're going to speak to actually use the asset store extensively in their prototyping phase. And they're going to talk about that, and they're going to talk about the specific assets that they use. And so I'd love to jump to the trailer of the game, and then we can introduce the team right after that. So let's get the trailer for Arashi.
Arashiの息子よ。南の地で何かよからぬことが起きているようだ。失敗の先には死のみぞ待つ。影が我々を目的の地へと導いてくれるだろう。
Hello and welcome. It's so nice to have you both here. The creators of Arashi Castles. And looks like chat, there's a lot of VR fans, people that are fan of Arashi already in chat. Like we have Scotch Boss VR too. Those who don't know, he's a great VR streamer. He specializes, great influencer on YouTube and on Twitch that does a lot of great VR content. So super happy to see you here. But why don't you introduce yourself? Peter, tell us who you are and what you do on the team.
Hi, I am the design director at Endeavor One. During Arashi, I was mostly wearing my systems design hat, so working on weapons, player, enemies, all that kind of stuff.
Nice. Welcome. Spencer?
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm Spencer. I'm a designer and work primarily on level design and encounters.
Nice. Welcome. Thank you so much. So tell us what Arashi Castles of Sin is. We just saw the trailer, but give us a lowdown of what this game is about.
So Arashi takes place in feudal Japan during the time of warring states. You play as a shinobi assassin. You are taking vengeance because these warlords have had a reign of destruction across the land. They've been claiming castles as their own that don't belong to them. You are going to extract vengeance for your clan and reconquer those castles throughout the course of the game.
So what were some of the, we've talked to Tom previously. For those who don't know, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Tom and how he felt about making this game. Why VR, actually?
So Tom, he is a child of the 80s, so you'll see influences like that coming through. I'm sorry, I got lost in Tom for a moment. His inspiration for the dog, for instance, was let me see if I can bring up a picture here. Yeah. He was into White Fang very much as a child, and Call of the Wild. Those really colored his desire to see some kind of a wolf. But then came along G.I. Joe. And you can see here we have Snake Eyes, and he's got a wolf. So I'm sure that got planted somewhere deep in Tom's subconscious. And so that's sort of where that came from.
Let's show. Yeah, can you pull it up, and then we'll actually show chat exactly that toy. And I want to see how many people in chat actually recognize that.
All right, chat.
And White Fang fans, shout out.
So why VR? We've all been kind of working in future tech for quite a while. It's exciting to us to solve problems that haven't been solved before. Mm-hmm. So, I come from the HoloLens team. We were doing a lot of communication type stuff with VR and with MR, and the notion of your feeling of presence when you're in the virtual world. We were also exploring the notion of co-presence. And that was important to us in Arashi because no matter how present you feel in a world, having someone else there with you really increases the intensity of the experience. And we wanted a companion that you would really develop an emotional bond with. So that is sort of the origin of Haru and why we have her.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you mentioned that because we've talked to other VR developers and they talk a lot about that co-presence. Until VR as a technology gets to a place where there's a lot of haptic feedback and things like that, the notion of co-presence can really make or break the immersive aspect of VR for me. So this game really achieves that with Haru, the wolf companion, right?
Yeah, and the team we spoke to yesterday, achieved that co-presence through having other players in the world, an online multiplayer. But in your case, it's a single player game, but you still wanted to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the techniques that you can use in VR that aren't available in classic 2D games are like Haru will meet your eye. She knows where you are. She knows where your head is. She'll look you right in the eye. And that's a really powerful experience.
Yeah, so let's, I think we should jump right in and actually check it out, right? So I think, Spencer, you're going to jump into the game for us?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Jump right into VR.
There is a world people see.
Get a look at the gameplay.
You'll see the most challenging thing about VR development here, which is you just have to keep putting on this thing and taking it off again all day long.
You'll probably be doing that a few times this stream.
Oh yeah, very used to it.
You'll see it. This is why we don't use hairstyling products.
Yeah, normally rocking a bandana for development.
And so what are we going to play through right now? Is this going to be the start of the
so
game?
This is the beginning of Castle 02. So you finish the tutorial, you're in the game proper, and this is kind of like the first big level. Let's see if this is cooperating. Sometimes it kind of freaks out the first time you want to set it up. All right, nice. Nice and big for you. Is that coming through all right?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Right on.
Yeah, so you guys can keep talking over me. I'll just kind of keep playing.
Some of the stuff that maybe I'll talk about what Spencer's doing as he's doing it. Right now he's approaching, there's Haru. She's meeting his eye.
No.
Her fur responds to your touch. Her ears will respond to your touch. And we have these different petting zones. If you pet her enough, she's going to start doing the little leg kick thing. We love dogs. we spend a lot of time sort of trying to figure out why we love them so much.
Right.
And then that's Haru.
So how many petting zones? I need to know.
There's the ears, there's the muzzle, there's the haunches. So yeah.
Oh
She
my
loves like right
god.
behind the ears. Yeah.
She actually-
does it for her.
Oh, the teaching leg.
Oh.
That's
Oh my
perfect. That's perfect. I have a husky and he does that all the time. It's amazing.
Her reactions
Yeah.
are so great.
So, okay, now it looks like Spencer, will you head over to the climbing wall?
Yeah, sure thing. Sorry, my link cable's a little
Oh,
wonky. Get back in there.
this was some of our developing during a pandemic. It's like, well, we're all getting the hardware. Sometimes it's finicky. Our IT department is, not nearby.
Yeah, yeah, especially during development too. Like a lot of this, where somebody's in the headset and a lot of people are kind of watching it and talking through and giving feedback. Like just trying to get some way to collaborate on something that's, you're in the headset. You can't look at the editor and do this at the same time. So there's some interesting workflow challenges with that for sure.
How big is your team?
We probably grew to about 20 during the development of Arashi. I think I actually don't know off the top of my head how many of us are working on it right now. 12 probably right now.
Okay.
A lot of like our QA that we were contracting with is basically done at this point, so that reduces the size of the team. Okay, so he is coming up to what we call the keyhole. This was meant to be sort of you climb up here and it gives you a reveal. Now we had to put a wall that kind of blocks some of the reveal just for perf reasons. And we hide a load here. Maybe Spencer can talk about that since he's the one who set all of that up.
Yeah, so you come out of the keyhole and you get this nice big vista. In a lot of the levels, we really tried to have some kind of establishing shot. That's, you know where you're going. You're trying to recapture the castles, obviously. So it's like there. I'm going there, and then of course the whole level is kind of you traversing the perilous zone in between here and your target. And so so a lot of it too is like this level's this big. Like Peter mentioned, there's a lot of like tricks we use to kind of hide loads, turn stuff on, turn stuff off, and really just sort of optimize so that all the computing power is going towards what's on screen rather than just what's kind of floating around in the level. So there's definitely a lot of sleight of hand tricks involved in kind of getting levels this scale to run well on PSVR.
And I noticed you climbing. So what is the actual motion you have to do in order to climb?
Yeah, it's pretty VR standard. So you kind of just grab with the triggers and move up and down. So there's different things you can climb as well. Oh, girl. So like the ivy is kind of a really common one. Like ladders, things like that. So like you can get up on top of roofs and get your ninja on.
Our solution for dismounting was to teleport you to the top with a vignette to make it comfortable, like a fade down, fade up. We don't actually have you pull yourself up or anything like that. It's just when you get to the top, we pop you off the top.
Yeah, it's a big comfort thing as well. Because if you do anything where you're moving the player kind of without them giving the input, like jump, you move the player, but they're in control of it. We do some vignetting to help with that. But climbing initially was, kind of like displaced you at the end and sort of moved you up there. And the fade was just something we landed on due to comfort. It just makes it way more comfortable for the player and, reduces VR sickness, which is a huge.
Can you elaborate what you mean by vignetting?
Oh, yeah. So when you jump, I'm not sure how well it comes through on the screen, but you can see that sort of the edges of my vision darken pretty dramatically just to reduce the amount of movement on the screen. which helps a lot for player comfort. So, if you're moving the player in VR, it can be really disorienting. So different things where we move the player forcibly, like jumping grapples, the other one that's kind of big. So you do this and it kind of grapples you over. It'll darken the edge of the screen if you have that option enabled. That will, just help the player feel a little bit better.
It turns out that movement in your peripheral vision can make you feel pretty ill. If you restrict the movement to kind of the center of your field of view, it's much more comfortable. Some people can have an iron stomach and can handle it. So we have the ability to turn that on and off in the comfort settings.
Right.
Yeah,
Sure.
the comfort. Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, the comfort settings, like Peter mentioned too, is a big thing where, it's really a lot up to the user, what they can and can't handle. So between snap turning, smooth turning, vignette on, vignette off is really important to make sure that the player has control over that, because there really is, it's not one size fits all for VR. There's a lot of nuance to what one player feels comfortable with versus another player. So making sure that everybody gets a comfortable way to experience the whole game is really important for us.
Yeah, Hassan and I talk about this pretty often because we review games from, beginners and stuff like that for fun sometimes. And I don't know if it's because my hand-eye coordination or my brain is getting old now. I can't handle motion anymore. Like I remember being really twitchy and being able to play like the Dooms from like the 90s and the 80s. And now when I go back and play those, even the modern Doom, I can play 30 minutes at a time maximum before throwing it.
I don't blame you. That game's all over the place. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
But so good.
It's crazy too
so
how
good,
even just like the more traditional like not 2D games, but like on a screen, even just moving around in first person, like I have friends that get really sick just with that, and so trying to get them to go into VR, it's like, wow, that's a big jump. You're putting the screen 2 inches from my face and it moves around and there's all this stuff going on. So there really is just a huge range of sensitivity based on the user. And you just want everybody to have a good experience.
Something else kind of along those lines is, a lot of games you choose between sliding motion and teleporting motion. So it's like either I'm moving smoothly through the environment or I'm kind of popping to my destination. And those two things are comfortable or discomfortable for different people. So we have smooth motion as our primary means of movement, but our other primary means of movement is our jump. And our jump actually feels a lot like one of those teleports, just like a super ninja-y heroic version of that. So if that is what you're comfortable with, you can actually get around the whole game by just jumping.
Yeah, and a lot of users do as well. Like having that sort of movement built into the game versus hidden behind some kind of option is nice. Yeah. And I think even just like going back and forth, like sometimes using smooth movement and sometimes jumping, like helps a lot reduce like the fatigue on the player. You can play longer, which is what we want.
And I'm guessing you went for jumping instead of teleporting because you had teleporting, then the stealth would maybe be a bit too easy and you could just...
That was part of it. Part of it was also just during our initial prototyping, when we were just building the prototype that we were going to use to pitch the game, the jump just ended up feeling good. And we loved it. We're like, this feels so ninja. And the actual experience of like translating through the air and watching yourself move to your destination, we thought it was going to make people really sick. And we were really happy when we saw that it didn't. So, we had to tweak and tune it a lot. There's a curve that controls, the start of the jump and the landing of the jump and how long those go on and that kind of thing. All of those things have to be tweaked for comfort. I feel like we got to a really good place with it.
Yeah, it looks great. And I love the solution for vignetting because that's also, you're achieving it stylistically, right? It's like you can actually make that. So somebody who's unaware that this vignetting is actually achieving, like them not feeling sick, might think it's just a stylistic choice, and it works just as good in that sense. Yeah. Yeah,
kind of that unseen hand of like, hey, we're gonna do what we can to make you more comfortable, but hopefully it doesn't impact anything. And it's it's subtle enough that you get the effects, but it doesn't really change anything. Like, doesn't make it so that you're blind when you're jumping or kind of inhibit the player in any way. It's really just a kind of a perfect solution.
Great.
And also, I'm curious, like you're obviously sitting, but is that the ideal kind of?
Yes, we're optimized for a seated experience. So things like our smooth movement, they feel great when you're seated, but if you're standing up, your inner ear starts kicking in and it gets weird. You can play it standing, but it's definitely more comfortable to play it seated.
Yeah, and our target platform too, like the PSVR, you're kind of like on a couch in front of the TV most of the time for the target audience. So we, definitely had to keep that in mind when we were developing, just to make sure that the comfort settings and everything was really aimed at making that end user experience as good as possible.
Nice. I'm just wondering also because like I'm noticing there's a lot of like a vertical plane, like you can be on a roof or there's like hills already I can see moving. That's not very horizontal. Like how do you, maybe we'll talk about it later, but that's something that you thought about, like climbing. I think that's actually a very difficult mechanic in VR games.
So, I mean, from a gameplay perspective, it was very important to us that we gave users the opportunity to tackle these levels in different ways that suit their kind of desired play style. So, the verticality is really important for kind of the stealthy player. We call them the spider. We call them the spider because in a lot of stealth games, you're hiding. You're operating from a place of like fear. But in Arashi, we wanted you to be a predator and we wanted your stealth to be set up so that you can take these guys down. So we wanted to make it feel like you were powerful, not like you were in fear.
Are there any other game inspirations where that dynamic is present that you looked at?
Oh yeah, definitely. And one that gets brought up too, which is really great, is like Tenshu is a really good one. Where you're just up on top of the castle roofs and everything. So we got a lot of inspiration from that, just in terms of like how we wanted to set up each space. And a lot of other classic stealth games. Metal Gear Solid. Hitman was a big one for me too. A little less on the a lot of those levels are really big and kind of, wide open. I don't know if you guys played it specifically, but like Hitman Absolution is a really good example of kind of our level design philosophy too, where like each bubble is wide. There's a lot of options, but there's kind of one in, one out kind of a format. So it gives you a lot of opportunity, like within each space. Like as you can see, like this one encounter zone, like there's tons of rooftops to get up on, watchtowers to climb up, grass if you want to stay on the ground. But you enter from there and you kind of exit in one spot as well, which is sort of the next zone. So
for everyone watching, we're gonna actually make an encounter together later in the show and dissect it in editing. So that's gonna be really fun. So I've noticed you climbing. I noticed you attacked. You killed a few people here and there. Let's go through all the mechanics and key features of the game. So we've established, you can climb, you can jump, and you can swipe your sword. What else can you do? There's a grapple hook.
Yeah, you can sprint. The grappling hook is a great way of getting around, but it also acts as a kind of get out of jail free card if you need to escape combat. It can also be used as a weapon. You can yank archers off of their towers. Then, do you have all the weapons right now, Spencer?
I do now.
A little bit of debug.
Cheat menu engaged.
Yes, having a debug scroll is really nice. So our weapons include the bow. Actually, I can't quite see what's there. He's got the flintlock, the poison food. Poison food is a fan favorite, and it actually comes from Tenshu directly. For some reason, these guys cannot resist a little ball of rice. It looks
just
so
pick
good
it up
to
and
them.
Eat it right off the floor.
And then they're disabled. Yep.
I don't know why, that's so funny.
His buddy wanted it more. He's like, no, dude, that's mine. Get out of here.
He ran for it. It was.
Oh yeah.
I love that.
They don't
Give me
get fed
that
very
rice.
well. These poor guards, like they're just looking to get some food.
Oh my.
Yeah,
So this
and
guy's
he's having
now-
a bad time with it.
He is now incapacitated permanently. So it's actually a pretty powerful weapon. It just it's also a very funny one. So we like that. Can you switch over to the blowgun real quick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ooh,
So,
oh yeah.
nice. Very stealthy.
Also, these things like the grenades, we have a flintlock. They are actually not historically inaccurate. Like if you go back and you look at the weapons that were available at that time period, these were, well, the grappling hook was not. That's pretend, but the rest of these weapons actually existed. So this blowgun, it's a lot easier to use than the poison food. So it has a similar effect, but we make it last a lot shorter period of time. So if you use the blowgun, you kind of got to get away from them, or you have to take them out. Okay, let's see. What should we do next? Oh, let's do gas grenade, actually.
Let's do it. Good. Yeah, we got the guys are here.
This may not throw very well because we have it tuned for PlayStation. And the input on PlayStation versus PC is really different. So we'll see how well it throws. But
perfect.
Yeah,
good shot. So these guys are now coughing. As the game is shipped right now, we have characters called Samurai who are armored, and so they're immune to some of your attacks. Right now, they are immune to the smoke grenade, but we're going to do a patch. We're going to change that because, after we made the game, we were like, nah, we like it better this way. Okay, let's see. What should we do next?
On the left is having a really bad day.
Yeah, he's
poison sandwich.
He's eating some bad food.
Let's make his day really bad. Let's apply some shuriken to him. If your day was not bad enough, shuriken can help.
There you go.
And he's down. Let's see. What should we show next?
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of how we set up the auto aim? I can do this one and then kind of go into the bow.
I think we're going to talk about aim assist a little bit later.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So for now, I think we just want to show the weapons. We have a large array of weapons. The game, we kind of had this mandate that we gave ourselves, which was you need to be able to complete the game with just the sword, the bow, and Haru. So you can play through the game entirely with just those things. But we also gave you a huge arsenal because we really wanted to encourage player choice and freedom of expression. And so if you get to be a ninja and you're up on the rooftop and you have this array of choices, it just gives you the ability to choose to play the game the way you want. Now, one thing that we did run into is when you have a ton of weapons, cycling through them to find the one you want can be challenging. So we added fast equip for the sword and the grappling hook, because those are the ones that we found most often people just wanted to have in their hands.
And can you assign other weapons to any shortcuts? Or?
We do not have assigning, we just have cycling. So we were very starved for buttons. If you're used to making a pancake game that you would play on a flat screen, pick a weird word. So if you're used to doing that, you have a controller. It's got a bunch of buttons, a whole bunch of buttons. And the kinds of interactions that you're doing are fairly limited. In VR, you can do a lot of weird things that your hands are moving around. We're tracking that. Your head's moving around. And the controllers just don't have very many buttons. So for something like inventory, you can get a complicated selection system, but we just went for cycling up and cycling down.
And you mentioned wanting to achieve just replayability, and that you achieve that, I guess, through having so many options for weapons. How early in the game do you get access to a lot of these weapons, or is it just are you constantly getting more and more weapons as you get through the game?
So they're rolled out kind of slowly throughout the first 3 stages. By the end of the first one, you have the really iconic weapons, the bow and the shuriken, as well as you start kind of default with the sword and the grappling hook. And then sort of the second level, which is the one I'm in right now, is really the stealth themed level. So we roll out the blow dart, the poison food, the gas grenade, things that sort of allow you to take out enemies without making any noise. And then the level after this, the third stage, is sort of like the run and gun, like mines, grenades, flintlock, things like that. And so it's kind of on theme, where each one's rolled out sort of how the level's themed for it. But then, like Peter said, you can do any encounter with any piece of equipment. So there's, if you get to the end of the game, you can kind of replay any level you want, and you're allowed to bring whatever equipment you want to. So they're all kind of designed with, that open-endedness where, hey, like, they're set up so that if you use the gas grenade, this encounter is still fun versus if you just use your sword. So we try to keep that in mind kind of the whole time.
Their expression.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, absolutely. And when you're launching into a level, we have this moment that we call the weapon wall room. It's your arsenal, and it's kind of a ritual that you do before going out into the battle. And so in this room, you have the 4 slots. You can come into battle with 4 weapons beyond the grappling hook and the sword. So you get to choose from all the weapons you've picked up in the game, which 4 you want to start out with in this level. Throughout the course of the level, you can pick up more weapons, etc. But we wanted to give you the ability to kind of pick a loadout for how you wanted to tackle the level. We restricted it to 4 just because we knew you would be picking up more things throughout the course of the level, and we didn't want to make weapon cycling such an issue. So, yeah.
And I noticed Haru moving around here and there. So can you guide Haru to like attack?
Oh yeah, so she's just as much of a piece of your arsenal as anything else. Like, she can move around. She has a couple of inherent abilities. One being her distract, so you can kind of have her sort of call enemies and displace them. So if you like, that's a distraction. Now I can move through the level. And they'll kind of move over to her and try to tell her to shoot, and she'll come up here and hide with me. Now they're all confused.
Did they ever attack Haru?
No. We did not want Haru to ever get hurt.
I understand. I understand completely.
Just couldn't do it.
Yeah. Wouldn't want to see it.
Haru is actually probably the most potent weapon in the entire game. We had 2 goals for Haru. One was for her to be this potent weapon, so that you feel that she is useful and you always want to have her around. The other reason is companionship and co-presence, and that was just as important. So we spent just as much time trying to build that bond with her as we did trying to make her an effective tool.
And then so I just noticed Haru maybe stunned the enemy, but didn't actually kill them, right?
Right. And so if you don't get there in time, she will, they'll throw her off of them basically, and then they'll be aggressive and they'll come after you. So you have like 30 seconds to take them out after she has pinned them.
Nice. So
and it's great too for encounters with multiple enemies as well, because it's just really a reliable way to kind of lock down one enemy, and just allows the player to engage more than one person at a time in a way that's like pretty satisfying.
And selecting a target for Haru, we didn't want to have a whole bunch of buttons controlling what Haru does, right? We don't have buttons to spare. So we made it all context-based. So whatever target you are selecting tells Haru what she needs to do. So if you are looking at an enemy and you press your Haru button, she will go and pin them. If you're looking at a spot, she will go over there and sit. If you're looking at her, she will howl, which will cause people to come investigate her. She can also do, like, we have dig piles that have treasures hidden in them. So if you look at one of those and you press the Haru button, she'll go and dig up a treasure for you. So it's all based on where you're looking and what it is that you're looking at.
That's going back to what you said earlier. You don't have that many buttons, so you've simplified it and made it contextual rather than have it be like, this button to do this.
Yeah, it saves a lot of inputs.
And this was not us feeling like we had to make this choice because we didn't have enough buttons. It was just, this is clear. It makes it easier for the user, and we were pretty happy with that. The one thing that is not necessarily working great right now is if you have a bunch of combatants right up in your business and you want to pin one of them, it can be hard during the heat of battle to like select that target. So we're looking at doing some improvements and having her kind of choose to assist you rather than being told to assist you.
Nice.
There's a great question in chat from Cypher AB6. Was the dog added as a companion to combat the loneliness one would feel in VR, or was it part of the story and a game mechanic?
So yeah, all of the above. Like this notion of co-presence really is important to us. Having someone else who's with you does combat this feeling of loneliness. I don't know if that's a feeling that everyone gets, but hopefully we make it less for those who do suffer from that.
I think it's great too. Like it just as a companion, like having her throughout the whole game, like gives you a nice kind of rooted. She's a story element, like you said. She's a really valuable tool, and just overall really good dog. So.
Another like key aspect of Haru, and this really goes for any companion, but they should always help you. There should never be a situation where they are making things harder for you. So, for instance, Haru will not by herself draw the aggression of these combatants to you when you're trying to be stealthy. It would just be terrible if you're trying to sneak around and she leads someone right to you.
Yeah, and something we really wanted to stay away from was just her causing any frustration. So yeah, like she's not detected by enemies. We don't want the player to get knocked out of stealth just because she happened to be pathing. You don't have like total control over where she's going all the time. So just making it so that exactly. Yeah, and the same thing too with like you mentioned earlier, like can she be damaged? No, like we don't want to, it doesn't want to be like you're looking after her. She's really there to help you.
Yep.
And to make you feel more powerful. So making it so that all she does is kind of positive impacts on things the player's doing, is another kind of important design decision to make sure that, she's always a, kind of a positive aspect.
Yeah, this is not, oh, sorry, go on.
I think that's a really challenging thing in games. Like I think all of us can name at the top of our heads like 2 or 3 games where there's an escort or companion or characters that are like NPCs in the air. It's not just all there. And then they rely a little bit more on lore. So you get really invested in the characters. One that always comes to mind for me is Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite. Loved her as a character, but didn't feel like you really could leverage this superhuman character, right? Which I think like you're trying to solve for in this game in a really great way.
Yeah, and that's a great one to bring up too, because there was definitely some inspiration, just in terms of the philosophy from that game. Is it's the same thing. She doesn't have health. She can't get killed. All she kind of does, like she tosses you extra ammo. At some point we'd even toss around like Haru, like we'll randomly dig and kind of find equipment for you. But just because she is so powerful on her own, you can kind of balance that with, well, okay, she doesn't have to randomly give you stuff, but she's always useful. Like you can always use her. She has a little cooldown, but it's a completely infinite kind of resource. So definitely got some inspiration there, but definitely in the same thing. Like we don't want it to feel like an escort. We want to feel like she's there to help you the whole time.
Think of Atreus in God of War. I think that is a perfect analog. Always keeps up with you, is always helpful, doesn't have to be looked after. This is not Ashley from Resident Evil 4.
Those are the 2 examples I always go to. So that's perfect. That's amazing. Yeah, that's perfect. Going back to when you're talking about movement, so like one thing you're obviously you're really trying to challenge the notion that VR doesn't make a good experience when it comes to movement and that. So I mean, there are so many movement options here. There's climbing, the grappling. What is it you think that is the standout? What are the standout choices you made that really brought that impression of that VR is something for movement?
I think that our jump is probably the one where we were most surprised by how well it worked. I think that when people start playing with it, they're also surprised. Like it feels like it shouldn't be comfortable, and yet it really is. And the other thing about the jump is it just gives you this feeling of being a mighty ninja that a teleport would absolutely lose. So you feel like you're hopping from rooftop to rooftop, Also, our virtual joystick, since this is on the PS Move, they do not have joysticks. So what we had to do is make a virtual joystick. So with your left hand, you basically point it in the direction you want to go. game that recently came out, Fract, has almost the same control scheme. We think it works really well. Yeah, and then the smooth movement, I think, like sneaking around, coming up behind someone, and stabbing them.
Yeah.
That's pretty important. Important things with that are being able to go fast or being able to go slow. The creeping around, like we probably have more of an emphasis on going slow than most games do, depending on your play style. So very slow for if you're the spider, but if you run and gun, you can sprint all over the place, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think part of what helps us out a lot too is just the variety. Like, you know, you're not always just walking. Like, you have the walk, you have the jump, you have the grapple, and kind of like breaking up how the player moves, you know, helps a lot in making the movement scheme feel good, you know, because you're not just always walking. You know, you don't get like we were talking about, comfort earlier is a huge part of like what makes a good movement system. Well, it needs to be comfortable. So like having you know, sprint is pretty quick, but our default walking speed is rather slow, and that helps you know, not only comfort but just give you that more meticulous kind of feel for the levels, that if it was a lot faster, you know, you'd have comfort issues, and it would just like make the whole game feel completely different.
Another thing that you should Another thing you'll notice if you look at our movement is that it tends to be linear. And what I mean by that is like your grappling hook is just going to move you along a line. Your jump has a curve to it, but there's no rotation left or right. Because what we have found and what research has shown is that people are really made ill by being turned. So we never try and turn you without your control, but being moved in a straight line is comfortable. So we use that all over the place.
Well, that's actually, we kind of talked about ladders earlier, and sort of why we landed on that dismount method as well is kind of a similar reason. Like, you know, if we're trying never to turn the player, but if you climb up a guard tower, we want you oriented right behind for a backstab immediately. So if we go down and completely fade down, we're able to, you know, get a little bit more liberty with what we're able to do to the player. With that movement. And so like, you know, grapples, you always land oriented the same direction that you were previously. But with ladders, we're given a little bit more control in terms of like how we frame things when you get to the top of certain climbs, which ended up being a really helpful tool.
Hey, Spencer, with the grappling hook up, can you raise both of your hands to make them visible? Okay, so raise your left hand a little bit more. Okay, now you can see it. So the grappling hook was working great, and we had gone, you know, many months with it exactly as it was. But people kept jumping behind archers, and they were like, "Now I have to switch to the sword, and this is a pain." So we were like, "Well, we'll just put a knife in your left hand," and so now you can just grapple up behind someone and bam, stab them right in the back.
That's amazing. So the knife is part of the it's basically the same weapon.
Yep. Yep.
Oh, that's
Later on in a lot of the levels, like we have these kind of several different varieties of watchtower based on the encounter, but this one's like kind of the bare bones one. It's just a platform. Some of the later ones are a little bit more built up, so you can actually grapple up to them. And so, yeah, like Peter mentioned, the user experience was you'd grapple up and then kind of like, you know, that was before we even had fast equip as well. So you kind of like try to figure out how to cycle over your sword and then attack. And it just doesn't make it feel, you know, it's not ninja. You're not, you know, fumbling with equipment. So like being able to have the grapple hook and, you know, a weapon at the same time kind of made, it helped the movement a little bit, but also just helped everything related to that interaction feel a lot more fluid.
Yep. Shinobi don't fumble.
No, there's no fumbling.
That actually leads to, we talked about verticality, and then like you're already talking about like the towers and stuff like that. Scotchbox VR asked a question earlier, like Valve devs have said it's really tough to get players to look up. And I guess that's not really true in VR.
It's still true.
Yeah, it's still true. And so actually that's a great point, because like look at all the grapples is when we were initially doing the prototyping, I think I have one in my level I can show you, but we had it where it was like this really bright red fish and they were all over the place. And it was kind of an eyesore, but the positive side about that is people would see them. And so, you know, like when you're on the ground, the grapples are all above you. And like you mentioned, it's hard to get people to look up. So there's a lot of things you can do kind of with lighting, with leading lines, like the rooftops lead into each other. So you see like, oh, grapple, grapple, grapple.
Mhm.
And the other thing we really leaned on too was kind of the highlighting. And so we have the notion in the game of like your jitsu, like your ping. And so that kind of reveals extra information, but it's on an input. But something that we decided not to go that way was the grapples, just because it's just so hard to get people to look at them. They're kind of above you. If there's enemies down here, you're really focused on them. Like, how do we get people to look at that? And so we just tried to make it sort of as loud as possible, just because so much of the game happens up here, like on this higher register, on rooftops, on sort of the grapple stealth routes that we have. And how do you, make sure that the player can see it? And the more subtle we were, the more people would walk right past them.
Mhm.
And it was just really common to have like, this whole chunk of the level that you can get to just wouldn't get interacted with, simply because people weren't seeing this one key element. And, the solution is really just make it as loud as possible, like kind of, throw everything you can. If it's kind of the feedback we want to hear is like, wow, the grapple points were too obvious. I could see all of them really clearly. Like, okay, that's good. We want, we don't want the gate for that being, did you look up and happen to see this one piece of scenery? We just want everybody to get it immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to do.
That's so interesting because we talk about this a lot when, I think we take for granted games. We've obviously all grown up playing games. We understand the vocabulary of games really well, especially, just one that's on a screen. The VR is still very new. There is no vocabulary associated to people mentioned in chat. It's like something as simple as climbing. You're like, oh man, do we have to rethink really climbing? Like, how do we do that? Like, what do people expect? It's like there's a whole slew of kind of movements that you're not thinking about anymore.
And a great example of this is melee combat, because on a 2D game or 3D game on a 2D screen, you are pressing a button and that button starts playing an animation, and that animation can trigger some response in an enemy, right? But in VR, you're moving your hands around. You're not pressing a button to attack. You're not playing an animation. You are the animation. You are the button. So a lot of what we do in VR is trying to infer what it is that the user is trying to do based on this limited information that we have. So like for one example, we have something we call velocity strike. And velocity strike basically means your sword can only hit things if it is moving with some velocity. This was in response to games like Skyrim VR, where you can just go up and tickle an enemy with your sword and they will die. But, trying to understand the player is trying to attack right now, you have to get tricky and you have to think of ways to kind of suss that out. And in that example, just the angular and the positional velocity both make a big difference.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. Is just like, how do you teach people all this stuff? Because a lot of, like Peter mentioned, that like every other game, it's press X to block, and in this one, it's like, okay, well, you gotta, there's a lot that goes into blocking. You have to kind of read what they're doing. Depending on how much you play, like you kind of start reading their animation sets a little bit, and you're like, okay, he's coming from that direction, and then physically moving your hand over there, getting the sword in the right position. It's intuitive, but way more complicated than simply pressing a button. So there was a lot of thought that went into like, how do we tutorialize all this stuff? How do we teach people? It's sword fighting. You can't just say, okay, now sword fight them. There's a little bit more that goes into that, and a lot of it is too just like the player kind of needs to experiment. Like they need to interact with the system, get to know it a little bit more, and really like practice. It's a physical movement, so the fact that people get physically more attuned to it is really interesting, and definitely a really cool side effect of doing combat in VR is there's a lot more going on in your brain to block versus like just memorizing timings. You're really starting to you're reading their body language, you're reacting, you're trying to kind of pose in places that are more defensive or more offensive. And it's just this really cool internal progression with people that the more we see them play, the better they get at sword fighting. Like it's this great sort of intrinsic skill that people develop, which is super cool. And it's not, it's not attached to a leveling system or anything else. Like you don't level up your sword skill throughout the game, but you can tell somebody that sword fighting on level 5 is,
much
has
better.
Way better form than somebody who's sword fighting on level 1, which is just this, this really cool side effect.
You're gaining actual experience rather than
Yeah,
experience
exactly.
points.
Yep, no experience bar.
Or
It's all in your head.
At least you're getting some muscle memory. I don't know that we're going to make you an effective sword fighter, but
yeah.
But yeah.
Disclaimer: you will not be able to hold your own against an actual samurai after this, but maybe your reflexes are a little bit sharper.
Yeah. So in terms of actual inputs for the velocity, right? So like, are you holding a button and swinging to get the attack through, or it's just reading
the
your
swing.
velocity?
Yeah, it's just a detection. So like if you see I block him and try to counterattack, that doesn't register because I'm kind of just poking him. But if I want to actually get an attack on, you kind of do that and then do a full swing. So it detects the actual speed that your sword is, and determines whether or not it needs to register an attack.
And it's a pretty painstaking process to figure out what is it that people would expect to happen. So like if I have my wrist and I have a sword in it and I go whoop, and I just tap with my wrist, like that sword feels like it should hit something. So we need to detect that, because if we're detecting that you're moving in a huge direction to get our velocity, we're not going to catch this small rotation. So we had to really spend a lot of time kind of iterating on that and trying things out and figuring out what worked. And really it's about matching the effects to what a user would expect.
And so there's a range there, right? Between the flick of a wrist and the swing of an arm, right?
Mm-hmm.
You allow for all of those. Okay, that's great.
Yeah, but that flick of the wrist has to be done with intention. You can't just.
Yeah, there's definitely in a lot of the first iterations, the killing people by wiggling. A lot of other sword fighting games kind of have that same thing, where when you're fighting somebody, like this is totally a reasonable way to engage people, and we just wanted to make sure. Yeah, exactly. And we just wanted to make sure, hey, it's the sword movement needs to be a lot more intentional. They, the enemies are doing that, and their strikes are very specific. And so we wanted the player to kind of engage with the system in the same way, where you're blocking, not just doing this. Like you actually need to kind of interact with the system for it to work for you a little bit more.
Yep.
I wonder if you could talk about the actual lock-on targeting and the aim assist, that we teased a little earlier,
Yeah.
I can show a little bit of that off too.
I can talk a little bit about aim assist, why we did it, and how we did it. So PSVR uses these move controllers. They sample at a fairly low frequency, so you're only getting updates from them every so often, and they're visually tracked, so they can occlude each other. And that means if you hold one controller in front of the other, the PlayStation can't see the one that's being blocked. That is a motion you do a lot when you're shooting a bow.
Mm-hmm.
So it was real hard to accurately hit things with the bow, but the headset is tracked very well, so we know exactly where you're looking. And so what we do is we draw a line exactly where you're looking, and then we draw a line where the bow would be shooting if we just used no aim assist at all. And then we look at all the targets and we say, is there a target that's close enough to where you're looking and close enough to where you actually shot? And if there is, then we make it hit that target. And that the same thing goes for the shuriken and the flintlock as well, and the blowgun.
I love that, because that's actually taking in the player's intention, not just the accuracy, but you look where your intention is and you aim. Just that depends on your accuracy, really. So it's something in between intention and accuracy.
That's a theme throughout VR development, is just trying to figure out what is it that the user's really trying to do here, and then make it easier for them to do it.
Mm-hmm. And really, that's just a side effect of when we were playtesting, starting on platform, like I was just doing, where that line right there on the PSVR doesn't work just because of how the controller tracking is laid out. And losing an arrow, the weapon economy in the game is such that the equipment's pretty valuable. It's not overflowing with items, so you want to be able to use them sparingly. And losing an arrow because your hand's wiggling is really frustrating for the player. And so really just erring on the side of the player and trying to get it so that it's a consistently good experience. It's just okay, well, let's kind of give it to them, like we'll err on their side and try to make it feel good. And the feedback we got once we made that switch was pretty overwhelming. Just the response to how people thought that, they're like, oh, wow, this is really accurate, or like, oh, wow, this is working great. And it's kind of, another one of those sort of unseen hand things where we're doing a bit of magic behind the scenes to make it feel that good. And that's the, how the aimnesses kind of came about.
And the other side of it is you also don't want players to feel like you're cheesing the game for them. So we did have to make it so that if you felt like you shouldn't hit, you wouldn't hit. So that's actually almost as big
just
of a
as
challenge.
Important. Yeah, exactly. Just as important as trying to detect what they're doing is like, okay, well, we can't make it. You don't want to be doing this and have the arrow curve over and hit that guy over there. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's reason, like, we wanted to make it so that you're not getting frustrated from something that's more of a system side issue.
You could make an aim assist system that was entirely based on where you're looking. In fact, that was the first thing we tried, but it just makes it too easy. So if you take into account where they actually aimed, and then kind of just see if those are close enough.
Speaking of actually hitting the combatants, maybe we can jump into editor to see and break down an enemy combatant and actually look at their colliders and look at their programs and how you differentiate different combatants.
Let's do it. Yeah. All right. Can you all see my screen?
Over to Peter's screen.
All right. So let me start by opening up the player prefab. So our player is based around, we got this package off the Unity Asset Store called Ultimate Character Locomotion. And that was a great jumping off point for us with our player character because it includes a lot of functionality that you would want to use.
So we're just going to jump to Peter's screen now. It's not actually,
no. Right
yeah,
on.
we're still on mine.
Just on sensor screen.
Looking at some water.
Other. Change screens.
Oh, here we go. Am I up?
Yeah, so maybe you can talk a little bit. Oh, there we go.
Okay, cool.
Right, awesome.
So you can see here we have something, Ultimate Character Locomotion. This script has a whole bunch of functionality in it regarding your movement. And these are abilities. Some of these actually came with the package. A bunch of them we wrote ourselves, but this is how you set up what the player can do. And then each one of these has values that you can set to tune it and tweak it to make it feel good. So one issue that we ran into is that this is a very custom component and it does not like to be overridden in prefabs. So we also use this for our combatants. So when we were building the prefabs for them, we just had to be very careful about how we were overriding fields in this particular section. Okay, so yeah, attribute manager. Right now I have the player health set to 9999. This is because I was doing testing. Normally it's 3. So I can talk a little bit also about, we have item sets. This is what, this doesn't show up on Inspector, so I'm not going to show it to you right now. But item sets allow you to sort of define what weapons the player has, and you can control like what's in the left hand, what's in the right hand. So when we decided to add that knife to the left hand when you're grappling, we had already built that knife to be in your left hand when you're using the katana. So it was just a matter of assigning that weapon into a different slot. Okay, so colliders. This is the capsule collider. It controls it controls your movement basically. So this is what's colliding with the environment as you're moving through it. It is not something that's used in combat at all because it's large, and if we used it, it felt like you were getting hit a lot when you didn't feel like you should be getting hit. So instead of that, we have this much smaller collider called the melee body collider. This would not normally appear at your feet. In runtime, we attach it to your headset. So it's basically dangling from your head, and it covers your torso and the tops of your thighs, basically. So we found that during our sword fighting, like, this really felt like if you got hit there, you felt like you should have gotten hit there. This one's fun. It's called the drop kick detector. So we have a feature that we kind of slipped in called Goomba-ing. And Goomba-ing means jumping on someone and killing them. So this collider, basically, it's on your feet, and when you jump, if you impact someone, it will send an event to them and kill them, basically. So this was pretty easy to add functionality-wise, and so we just have that little collider there. This one, trigger volume collider, you can see it's on this player body layer. So we have a layer called player body, we have a layer called player blocker, and we have a layer called player register. And those are basically like, this thing will block the player. This is something that the player can interact with. And so the player register layer we use for volumes that the player, like trigger volumes, that kind of thing. The blockers we use just to keep you contained within the levels. We also have colliders. Hang on one second. We have colliders on your hands as well, which, well, they're in here somewhere. I won't show you those at the moment, but they're on the player hand layer, which we had to add a player hand layer late in the game because of pickups. You were walking over pickups to pick them up, so colliding with the player body was fine, but we wanted to make it so that you had to reach out your hand to touch them. So that just meant making a new physics layer for the hand and making a new receiver layer. And just in case you're interested, like our physics matrix, you can see here, it's got a lot of stuff in it, but we have been really careful about making sure that things that need to collide with each other are the only things that collide with each other. And if you're starting in game development with Unity, this is important for perf reasons. It's a really, really powerful system, but clean it up and make sure that you only have things colliding with things they should be. Okay, so...
There's so many times where things are not working the way they should, or you're not going through walls you should, like doors or areas you should be going through, and it's all because of that. Because you have the wrong check mark.
Yep. Yeah, and we had, for instance, the default layer, we had it colliding with itself. But that meant that all of our static geometry was like evaluating against each other. So we made a different layer that's just called rests on ground. And so that's for dynamic objects to collide with the world. But we limit it to very few things for perf. And it's really helpful. Okay, so... see, what's some more interesting stuff? Here are weapons. This is a system that we got from the Ultimate Character Controller package and we used. So we used their system for equipping the inventory and for some of the functionality. And then we rewrote stuff or wrote our own for things like the shuriken and aim assist and all that kind of goodies. Oh, and actually, while I'm talking about this is another opportunity to talk about something we got off the asset store, which was called Remote Inspector. And Remote Inspector allows you to open up a hierarchy window. I can't show this to you right now because I don't have my PlayStation Dev Kit running. But what you can do is you can run your build on your PlayStation Dev Kit. You can open up a hierarchy and see all the game objects that are currently active. And then you can open an inspector on them and you can change fields in those in real time. Watch those effects take place on the PlayStation. So for instance, our hands are oriented in a system specific orientation. So like the controllers that you're using for Oculus, they feel different in your hands. And so if you have a sword or a grappling hook in your hand, it's going to feel like it's pointing the wrong direction if you have it in your hand the same way on the PC and on the PlayStation. So this allowed me to go in and just adjust all these little angles and orientations while looking at the thing in my hand and just get it to feel right. Iterating on that without a tool like that takes a lot of time because it takes me about 7 minutes to make a build for PlayStation. Yeah, so that's the player prefab. We didn't have to worry about any inheritance stuff with the player because it's a singular thing. There are actually some other parts to the player, like this main camera. At runtime, we do hook up there where we hook up your VR controllers and headset to the player. So this allows us to move around the body and stuff. Also notice there's no head. So there's no head because you're in VR. You have your own head and you don't want to be looking through geometry. Right. But what this meant is you also don't cast a shadow of a head. So for that reason and for perf reasons, we have a simplified version of the player that has a head and is only used for casting shadows.
And so I'm sure that head moves around with your head. So you can
absolutely.
Okay,
yep.
Nice.
And actually we have like the legs so VR doesn't track your legs. So again, we have to infer what is it that the player is doing. So we have animations on your legs so you can see yourself running. They're not going to match up to what your real legs are doing, obviously, but it's pretty entertaining to like run across a rooftop and see your ninja shadow running along on the ground.
Really cool. Can you show us that freaky, or maybe not so freaky head that like if you were to turn on the mesh?
Let's see. Okay, shadow head.
That's so interesting because that's a Township Tale. None of the characters had legs. So they just bypassed it altogether. They're like, they're just, nobody will have legs. They're just floating torsos.
We talked about just having hands. We talked about having hands to the elbow, hands to the shoulder. Forrest Soderlund, who is our technical animation lead, was really passionate about getting full body, and so he just did that. He's also the one who set this all up. So this is the shadow head geometry. I can't see it. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it. But it is only there to cast shadows. And
I
actually,
we have shadows only on it. You change that?
Well, here it is anyway.
Oh, there it is. Oh, cool. Okay.
You can see his little hair bun. Yep.
Nice.
So that, given our shadow resolution, this is definitely enough to cast the shadow. And computing the shadow is so much cheaper for something simple. So yeah, that's what we did for that.
Well, your players actually noticed it though, or appreciate it. Some Lord Patrick in chat said, one of my favorite things about Arashi is seeing your shadow casting on the ground when rooftop hopping.
Right on. Okay, I was trying to give a thumbs up, but it was off screen. Okay, so now we can look at one of the combatants. So I will... Let's just look at this guy real quick. So the way we built these is we have a base prefab called Combatant Base. Combatant Base contains all of their brain. It contains basically all of the functionality of the character, but it does not contain their model. And one of the issues that we ran in with using prefabs was that we have things that are children of the model, like we have ragdoll colliders, for instance. We have some weapon stuff. We have other colliders that we use for different things. But all of those things, if we place them in a mesh at the top level at this prefab, it becomes hard to override them in lower prefab. So this one, we leave the model out, and then in the children of it, like Samurai Base, this has everything that makes you different from Ashigaru, who are our foot soldiers. It has everything changed about him, and it includes a model, because all of our samurai use the same model, they just have different materials. So then I have children of this that actually have the materials applied. These enemies scale in difficulty across the course of the game. So in order to do that, we have something called identity. And this is a script that we put on everybody, and we tell them, what makes you different. So here we have weapon immunities. These are things that cannot harm a samurai. We're going to remove this one, smoke grenade, and it's very easy to do. This is like hooking up things that needed to be attached to certain bones in the mesh. We do that here. And then here's a list of like their attacks. Here I can say, here are all the attacks you can do. These are opening moves. So the first move you do will be one of these, and you have a probability of choosing that attack. So like if I want them to, well, this guy, for instance, has this one, stance 03, single attack sequence 06. So this is his sixth potential attack, and he has it turned off. So other guys might have that attack turned on, but he has it turned off just by setting its probability to 0. So that is how we set up the attacks. Here's where we just give them some of their collider information so they can move those colliders into the right spots on the model that they're actually using. And then this like block state reaction, we were running into an issue in Melee where you go up and you hit your enemy, and then they go into this like turtle state, we call it, where they're blocking. And this is so you can't just whack on them until they're dead. But what we found was it's kind of boring having a guy go into this defensive pose and then you're just whacking on them and it's doing nothing. So to make that feel better, we gave them these we gave them these block state reaction sets. And these basically say, if someone comes up to you and is just banging on you, here are your options. And so what we have them, they can step to the side, they can jump backwards, or they can counterattack. And that counterattack ends up being a really effective deterrent to a player behavior we wanted to avoid. So we didn't want you just going up like that and having a counterattack that just smacks you right in the face if you're doing that is a really effective way of discouraging that. I also have this AI brain. So in a lot of our prototyping, we had used some visual scripting stuff like behavior trees, or we used Bolt, which is a really, really powerful package. This was all really, really awesome during prototyping, but in actual production, we switched to hand-coded state machine that Ian Backlund, who is an awesome programmer, he did this. And so he is this AI brain. It has all these different states it can go into, investigate, patrol, notice, startle, and then melee, charging, all this kind of stuff. So that's the other place where we define or what they can do. Yeah, so that's our combatants. Oh, one other thing. Let's see. Let me just. Okay. Let's just look at one of these guys real quick. They have one more collider. Hang on a second. Sorry for the dead air. Okay, aim assist target. So this is just a little tag, basically. It's a little script that we can add to anyone, and you can add as many of these as you want, and you can put them wherever you want. This aim assist one, and it's going to be moved at runtime to this target point that you specify. So his target at runtime gets moved to basically his chest. But you could add as many or as few of these as you want. You can do things like you can add them to objects like our lanterns. We have stealth lanterns, which the player wants to destroy. So you can target those with aim assist just by sticking one of these things on it. So that made it really easy to control sort of how effective or how frequent our aim assist was. And you can even put like multiple spots, one on the head, one on the chest or whatever, so that it will go to where they feel they're aiming. We didn't end up actually shipping that way. We just have one per enemy, just because it was fine. So, yeah, I guess that's all I have to show on this right now.
I think you're also going to
questions.
Yeah, I think you're also going to talk to us a little bit about the animation event.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just. So getting to this is a little bit. So, okay, when I specified he had this attack, I specified it with this sequence. And this sequence, you can give them a list of actions. So they could do like strike from above, strike from the left, stab in the middle. Like that could be a sequence. But what we ended up doing is we only have one action per sequence. So we had the flexibility to do this, but it ended up not being necessary for the experience that we were building. So you'll only ever find one of these actions. And then these actions contain all of this information about the hit windows. And the hit windows basically define, like, during this attack, when you're winding up, when you're swinging, when you're recovering, like at what points can you actually cause damage to the player, which is activate hitbox and deactivate hitbox. And then there are some other things that they can do. There's a block, so you can, like during the windup of their attack, you can say, okay, if you strike them while they're winding up, they will block. Or you could say, if you strike them while they're winding up, they will take damage and they will cancel that attack. So that will cause them to go into a hit reaction. So this is just how we define for each animation how it operates in Melee. And then it goes to these attacks. And these attacks, they can be selected through that system. And in the actual animations, if we look at them, you can see these events are set up in the animations themselves. So you can just scrub through the animation and be like, okay, at that point, his sword should become active. And at that point, it should deactivate. Now, what we learned pretty far into development is that if you interrupt one of these animations, these events are not guaranteed to play. So in order to make that like rock solid, Ian wrote a system, which is what I was just showing you with the melee actions. So he made a system that takes those animation events, pulls them out of the animations, and then puts them into this object. And when you're actually playing the game, this is what's defining those hit windows, not the actual animation events. So we kept using the animation events in the animations because the workflow was excellent. But then we process it and use it differently at runtime. From our perspective as designers, it is the same. But I just wanted people to understand that we're actually doing something a little different under the hood.
Did you ever plan on using like Timeline or maybe even like Cinemachine for this portion?
So we use Timeline all over the place, but we're using it mostly for our cinematics. Mm-hmm. And that's both the pre-rendered and the in-game. Forrest, again, the guy who did those shadows for the player, did a ton of work with Timeline. He's now an expert on that. Timeline is an incredibly powerful tool. We've used it on previous games, like basically to run the entire game logic. We did something called Dome of the Dead, which was a kind of an arcade game type experience. So you didn't move around, but you were moved around and you were moved by Timeline.
Yeah.
And that was how the entire game played out.
On Rails, essentially?
Yeah, yep.
Nice.
Timeline is great for doing an on-Rails experience.
Nice. Very cool. And we're back. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you got a snack. I got some chocolate, so I feel very good. I know that it's lunchtime for all our friends over in San Francisco. So thanks for joining us as you have a mouthful of sandwich. We're playing. We're not playing. We're hanging out with the developers from Arashi Castles of Sin. It's just a great shinobi, assassin, feudal Japan kind of game in VR. And we just took a look at all their combats and movements. And now we're going to move into the most important part, which is their wolf companion, Haru. So maybe Spencer can kick it off and tell us a little bit about Haru.
Yeah, so I'm kind of firing up the safe house right now. Like we talked about earlier, she's your companion throughout the whole game. She's kind of part of your toolkit, but also, a big story element and a big, component of how we were creating, presence for the character and something really relatable. So yeah, she's everything we could do to kind of make her more friendly, more fun, and more interactive. Was just like a big labor of love that kind of everybody in the team touched a little bit at some point, which is really cool. And she interacts with stuff. She's really present throughout the whole game. So like every discipline really had to get in there and do everything they had to do, to support her and to get her to work as well as she does.
Nice. And you revealed a fun little fact about Haru in the game. She was mocapped, not from a real wolf, but
from a very wolf-like dog.
Right.
And actually a Canadian dog. So yeah. We worked with a mocap studio up in Vancouver during a pandemic, and they were able to capture all of that, and they were awesome to work with.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's head on over and
also just
screen on here.
One little thing. Spencer is going to be showing some interactions with Haru that are purely about bonding. So there's a mechanic here that you will never use in the actual combat missions. And it's just here to play with her. So it's fetch.
Yeah, so like I was mentioning too, this is kind of the safe house. This is sort of the hub for the whole world, like where you get your missions, and of course we get to play with Haru. And so we were kind of mentioning earlier too that she's got a bunch of different states. So when she starts here, she's in kind of her default play state. If you don't have a weapon out, she kind of acts differently and sort of tries to interact with you a little bit more. She kind of has her ears perked up. She looks a little bit more friendly. She'll try to come up to you, things like that. And then we get to do the classic dog interaction, which is fetch. And kind of like Peter was mentioning earlier, all the throwing and stuff is tuned for PSVR specifically. So it's a little different on Quest, But
that also actually brings up a good point, which is fetch does serve an additional purpose other than bonding with Haru. The ball that you're playing fetch with has the exact same physics properties as the grenades that you use during the day. So this is a low stress, infinite tries chance to practice your grenade throws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of teaching that soft skill. Again, like we were talking about, with the swords where it's like, it's a player movement, like they physically have to do it. So you kind of have to learn how to do it on your own, and kind of hiding this in there was just a really positive side effect of getting this really cool interaction with your buddy here. And yeah, she'll just play fetch. Like I mentioned, she's kind of in her friendly state. There's no combat in the safe house or anything. You don't even have your weapons. Oops. So yeah, she just comes out. Okay.
So we're moving to it.
Oh, sorry.
And so you mentioned
just trying to connect.
You mentioned Haru being in her friendly state. What are the different states that Haru can be in?
So the primary ones, friendly is kind of her state if you're not armed, like I said. In the combat missions, she has like a stealth state. So if you're in a stealth volume or something like that, she'll like punch down and kind of act sneaky with you and kind of get in the grass with you. And then she also has like her kind of aggressive combat state. So like if you're fighting somebody or using her to engage somebody, she will behave differently. I'm not sure if there are any other ones. Peter might know a little bit more about those.
But the stealth state is also interesting because this is an example of us using Haru as UI. Mm-hmm. So we want you to know that when you're in stealth, you can't be detected. And so we need to communicate to you pretty clearly that you are or are not in stealth. And the way we do that is we make your hands look glassy and transparent. So if you can't be seen looking at your own hands, they look invisible to you. But you have to be looking down to see that. And if you can just glance over and see Haru and she is crouched and looking stealthy, you know that you're stealthy as well.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and also too, kind of the same way the detected state as well, where like if things are behaving differently, you sort of know like what's going on. So like her being in her combat state, the music changing, the actual UI above the enemies, and like all of the stuff kind of goes together to kind of inform the player what's going on. And kind of like we were talking about the grapple hooks earlier too, it's like in VR, it's so easy to miss things, like even big chunks of UI or whatever. So kind of conveying what state the game's into the player is something where the more layers you put on the feedback, the more, the larger the chances that the player will understand what's happening.
And I love that it gives you more reason to pay attention to where Haru is. And just keep,
Yep.
to be aware of that so present.
Something else we haven't mentioned about Haru is how she decides where she wants to be in the world.
Okay.
And so our levels, the way that Spencer has built them, are wide pipe. So you have a lot of options moving throughout it, but it has a single entry and a single exit. And so Haru is aware of which direction that the exit is in, and she's also aware of which direction you're looking at, and she will try and stay visible to you while kind of leading you in the direction that you need to go to solve the level. What we didn't want is for her to be getting kind of caught up with you in the middle of combat or walking into you a bunch. She will approach you now if you have your hands empty. Because really, like, there are two states. One is you want to interact with Haru, you want to pet her and play and have fun. The other is she's a combat tool. So if your hands are empty, you're telling her, I want to play with you. If your hands contain a weapon, you're saying, we're serious, we're down to business.
I have a question now that we're so close to Haru. That fur looks really great. Is that an issue actually on the PS VR?
We had to spend some effort optimizing it. We also turn it off at distance, so it does a level of detail fade out. Although you would never notice that. Like, she is so furry up close, and then when she gets far away, it still looks pretty much the same.
Yeah.
And the fur actually will respond to your hands, in addition to like the ears and etc. But yes, the fur is expensive, and we had conversations about, how much of our perf are we willing to spend on Haru? And the answer ended up being quite a lot of it. We care about Haru. We want her to be great. And a non-furry Haru just was not gonna hit the bar we wanted.
So is this going to be an issue, you think, if you go, I know right now Arashi is like a PS exclusive, but if you go on the Quest or something like that, because, the data files are obviously much smaller. I think there's definitely a max. So is that going to be an issue?
I don't know, actually. That's pretty far outside of my areas of expertise. Cameron Pinard, who is our technical art lead, he could answer that question for you right now. But unfortunately, I can't.
I see your community manager or someone in chat. I see Endeavor in chat, so maybe they'll go and fetch that answer for the chat that asked earlier. Thanks.
But as you asked about porting, I just want to say, we did our development on PC, but our target platform was PS4, and so we built everything with super high-res textures, with incredible detail, and then we down-res that stuff. And Unity made it possible for Cameron to go in and say, half-res textures, bam, and you're good to go. I'm way oversimplifying it because they had to do a lot of work, to get the geometry perfing right, and the right amount of content. But it definitely. Getting it running on PlayStation was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be.
What are the usual challenges of porting from PC to VR for the PS VR?
This is the first game we've done. So, the first game we've done on PSVR. You speak to it, Spencer. You sound like you have something you want to say.
Yeah, so it's definitely, I mean, in terms, like, so we did our development kind of this way, like doing it in editor on the Quest, but then kind of having the end result be the PSVR. A lot of the bigger challenges, just the different system. So like it's running on a PlayStation 4. This is a high-end PC. So kind of just the difference there was a big one. So like we've mentioned a couple of other times of like, okay, well, the collisions, we really focused on perf for like geometry, shaders, textures, like a lot of that stuff was perf related, runs fine on the PC. But then once you kind of get into the, more console hardware, there's a pretty big gap there. So just making sure we could do everything we could to be as efficient as possible and just be really conservative with what we're spending processing power on, because it's so much more finite on that system. And the other really big one that jumps out is just input. The controllers are different from the Quest to the PSVR, and so really trying to figure out like a good balance of, well, hey, it has to be close enough because we're using this to develop, and we need it to be mostly representational, but also like what can we do with that input scheme to really make it work. And so like we were talking earlier about movement and like the virtual joystick, and so there was a lot of effort that went into making the overall experience feel the same, even though the input scheme is dramatically different.
Nice. Yeah.
So those are the big ones that kind of jump out.
I think another challenge we should mention is just VR versus 2D games. Perf is incredibly important in VR because if you are not perfing, you're going to make your users sick. You're going to give them migraines. Like no one is going to like that. So, Sony provides some great tools that will let you know anytime you're dropping below 60 FPS. And so we just had this long process of finding everywhere where the game can drop below 60, addressing that. But like you cannot ship an uncomfortable game. So that's something important. You have to make sure that you're consistently running 60 FPS.
Yeah, and then like you mentioned too, just like a comfort issue, it's extremely important. You got to render everything twice, so you got to make everything kind of twice as efficient. And if you ever risk dropping below there is, it's not just like in traditional games where you drop a frame or two or it looks weird. Like you get people, really bad physical discomfort, which you really want to stay away from.
I mean, just to borrow from regular screen-based games, like we talk about mechanics like that, the feeling, the sensation, the good feelings of mechanics all the time, right? And that can like oftentimes, I mean, I combat is like one of my favorite things to kind of consider in a game. I will often forgive a lot of other things if some of the gun mechanics feel really, really good, So it's the same thing with VR for me. Like doesn't matter how good the game is, if I start getting used, it's not going to happen.
Absolutely.
Your tech lead just magically appeared in chat. Evoking Worlds, tech art lead here from Endeavor One. We've not started the process yet, but we're optimistic on finding solutions that will keep things at the quality bar that we want to target. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
All right.
So I was wondering, for Haru, is there any more to look at in the context of a combat situation, or should we jump right into
absolutely.
There is.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that, and that'll sort of lead in. So we'll get up to my sandboxes. Yeah, so you can kind of see in the scene, there's like some markup stuff. I'll show you a little bit more in here, but there's a lot that kind of goes into defining like where she can go apart from nav mesh. So we also kind of have the nav mesh, which is what she uses to move around. She has a little bit of a different version of it than the combatants do. And then the other thing that's really important is just for her to be able to follow you. Like most of the encounter spaces, we kind of have one big nav island in the middle of it that the combatants can use to navigate around. But Haru needs to be able to follow you kind of beyond that. And so without using the off-mesh nav points that kind of come inherently baked, we wanted to be a lot more specific than that and kind of give her these markups of like, hey, you can go up here. Hey, you can't go up here. So like this is a little example of, if you had like a platform that's sort of like a rocky outcropping or something, you would want her to be able to follow you up there. And so you have this kind of node system that allows you to say, hey, this is somewhere you can jump, follow me up here. Versus, this is like a rooftop. It'd be weird if she followed you up there. Even though there's nav up there, she should, not follow you and kind of stay on the ground and do that. So there's a little bit more that goes into it. And then, as the levels get more complicated, there's just a ton of these all over the place that are kind of managing like where she could go. Yeah, and so I can kind of start talking a little bit more about the levels if you'd like.
Yeah, perfect. So we can. So I guess we're gonna break down an existing level, or are we gonna just go right ahead?
Yeah, I can start by talking a little bit about how they are assembled. So we have, for a variety of different reasons, kind of have different things broken up into different scenes using Sector, the tool that kind of keeps track of everything and keeps things loaded and unloaded. So when you open the default scene, you can tell it's pretty empty. We have some sort of core stuff that needs to exist throughout the whole level. Like for jump points, for example, and some other stuff like that, like the checkpointing system and things. But we try to keep the base level pretty light so that we can sort of focus on the area that you're in. And so as you're going through, these certain levels are kind of added additively or loaded additively. And so this is kind of the first one, which is like the encounter set, the encounter scene that has all of the encounter management. You can see it's all the enemies. All of these boxes are like the stealth volume, so like where you can go to be in stealth, and that kind of defines that. Pickups, traversal elements like climbing, grapple points, things like that, all live within here, so that we can kind of work on it in parallel with the environment stuff, which is housed in different scenes. And kind of like I was mentioning earlier, we want to make sure that we're focusing the computing power on what's actually nearby the player. So we have them broken into really like pretty granular chunks throughout the level, and we kind of load and unload those based on where the player is. So you can see this is actually the area we were running around earlier. And so it has this kind of starting zone, and you walk through here. And like we mentioned, there's kind of a load here that, if you can see, this isn't loaded when you're up at the Vista because it doesn't need to be. You just get sort of the imposter for this thing over here for the castle and stuff like that. So we get that big vista that we saw right there. And then as you jump down, you can see the level's not loaded, and then that extra scene gets, oh, whoops, not lighting. This one. That extra scene gets loaded in, and then some of the previous geometry from the earlier section gets loaded out. We have here is kind of what we call the soft load, where the player drops down somewhere that they can't jump back up on top of, and things like that allow us to, we know they can't get back there. We can unload a lot of stuff, and just allows us to keep our, our processing power really focused on what's around the player.
Something I want to add to that is just, so we are chunking things up into manageable chunks that will fit in memory, and Spencer is working hard to make gameplay make sense within those chunks. But something like that, an optimization in your art, can have unexpected influence on gameplay. So we added these hard loads, and suddenly you could sprint right past the encounter. You get to that hard load, it unloads all those enemies who were chasing you, and it loads up the new set. So like things that you're doing for perf reasons can definitely have gameplay effects. So that's just something to always be aware of. You can be bitten by things that you would not predict.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of mentioning, so that was an example of a soft load. Like you drop down, there's no loading screen. You move to the next area, and things are kind of loaded in, loaded out. The other thing that we do is, like Peter mentioned, hard loads, where you actually get up to it, it completely fades down, unloads everything behind you, and loads up a whole new set on the other side. Which, it's still a big chunk of that was player comfort. Like if you're doing a lot of loading and unloading, it's kind of heavy, so it can cause hitching, which we really didn't want to happen. And this is kind of the where we landed to sort of address all of those problems. But like Peter mentioned, there's some gameplay fallout, and it definitely like divides the spaces a lot more. So like within this, there's a good amount of freedom, but you have to go through this load. We know the player has to at some point go to this point to be loaded to that point. And we don't do a lot of places where there's like two different ways getting out of a zone, just because of all of the extra complexity that kind of adds to the levels. Another really positive side effect of this is that it just allows multiple people to work on things at the same time. So like, we can have our environment art team in the scenes working on the environment art, as I'm in the encounter scene working on the encounters. So it just really helped our workflow to be able to work on things at the same time and like be able to see what other people are doing really well by just loading the scenes that they have checked out.
Also like a multi-scene workflow.
Yeah, exactly. It's like keeping stuff broken up like this. We use Perforce, so you can kind of check stuff out and say like, hey, nobody else can work on this. I have it checked out. Just prevents work from getting stepped on. And so having it broken up like this, you know, we can have somebody's in village A fixing a bug with some collision on this one thing, and then I can be in the encounter set messing with the encounter in that scene, and then somebody can even be working on the next village all at the same time without losing any work, which is something that really helped our workflow a lot. Yeah, so all of them are kind of broken up like that, and then talk a little bit about how we put those together. So this is like a little sandbox. A lot of the encounter design was sort of done this way because, like I said, you know, the environment's in development. Everything's kind of in development at the same time. So it was really helpful for us to kind of break things down, have a really simple environment, but sort of assemble the gameplay how we wanted. So we did a lot of work in, you know, just gray boxes like this, and then ended up translating it into the final game. It helps a ton too, like I said, kind of workflow wise, where you can sort of mock up an encounter, get in there, and then have people play it without all of the extra lead time that, you know, decorating it and doing all that other stuff involves. So by the time we actually get to something more final that we're ready to, you know, push into production and get all the way through the level pipeline, it's already gone through like quite a bit of design iteration, you know, play testing, feedback, stuff like that, which really helps it just get it to a spot where it feels good. And then we do all of the additional work. Just saves a lot of time with the small team. That's really important.
You don't want to be going back and forth too much between the level design.
Yeah, and the more you get kind of dug in and the more stuff's refined and like spaces get worked on, pivoting or like making big changes becomes harder and harder. There's just more stuff on it. You know, things get more complicated. There's a lot of assets, a lot of objects. Where if you're in something like this, it's like, okay, hey, move that house over there. It's like, okay, cool, I can move it. Whereas if it's a whole scene, like there's supporting geo, there's, you know, the nav mesh has been baked, there's props placed all over it, there's probably pickups in there somewhere, and like if you move that, there's all of this kind of fallout that just causes a lot of churn that we wanted to try to avoid as much as possible.
I love how that rooftop is just like a cube on its side, you know, like
oh yeah, absolutely. And so actually here, before I get into this little demo, I can kind of show you a little bit more behind the scenes. So that same space we were in just a second ago, this is kind of the gray box that it came out of. So you can see, like, you know, you enter from here, it's not a waterfall, but it's mechanically pretty similar. You kind of have the same buildings, the same patrol points. You know, you can see it's slightly different, but mechanically really the same. Like this is that one roof, that's that other bigger roof, and kind of that other building over there. The bridge is even in the same spot. Like you have the next areas arrayed, you know, really similarly, and that's kind of, you know, how we would get all the ideas for the spaces and kind of refine them a lot before we got to the process of actually adding anything to the actual levels. And so you can kind of see like where that came from. We would, you know, hammer on this quite a bit, get some feedback, get some people to play it, see what's working, what's not, and then, you know, kind of shepherd it through the whole thing. But while we're doing that, it's still iterated on pretty heavily. Like once you start adding art, it contributes a lot to how the encounter plays out. So just, you know, continually adjusting, and you can see like this is the gray box for that space we were just in, but it's pretty different. And a lot of that just came out of like mostly play testing and getting people to get hands-on and seeing what's working, what's not, and just trying to kind of like sand off all the rough edges and really make sure that each area is working well.
So does any of this gray box persist until to the final version? So is this, are you actually using this for the colliders and for the nav mesh? Or is it then applied to something else?
No, it's merely a placeholder. So it's like, you know, kind of like we're talking about, like one of those boxes, it's a building. So, you know, when we kind of take it into production, it's like, okay, well, we got to replace that with a real building. And then the building has all of that stuff applied to it. We use prefabs pretty heavily on that. where like I kind of use these like two really standard, like it's a box. I need a box in the encounter so you can hide behind something. And it's just a stack of stuff. But in the level, that could be a rack of fishing supplies. It could be sake barrels. It could be, you know, it's kind of open to whatever the environment artists sort of think it is. But mechanically, it's, you know, it's this blocker here, or it's doing this thing to allow you to jump off to this rooftop, or, you know, this, that, and the other.
So if you go back to the scene with the finalized art, the one you were in earlier,
Oh yeah.
I would love to see an example of like a house, and maybe show me the like the nav mesh on the house, or a piece of the ground, and then what the collider looks like as well.
Absolutely. So this is probably a good time to mention too, Ian, who worked a lot on kind of all the Haru navigation stuff like that, gave us this really awesome toolkit for doing all of this navigation stuff. That kind of like it sort of gives you the ability to create this like really targeted nav mesh. So if you just hit bake, you get all of these like little kind of spots and stuff all over the place. And that really doesn't work super well with the way Haru navigates. She tries to get there, or like tries to get on those little spots, which can be pretty weird. So there's this big suite of tools that we use internally that just, you know, it blocks all that stuff off. It keeps all of the nav baking in the areas that we want. So you see, we actually have this, it's really clean. There's not a nav all over the place in kind of random places. It's really targeted and really like just on the playable space in the ground. And so as you can see, there's, you know, this example of the house with an interior, which is a little bit more complicated than just having like a box excluded. And so the interiors were actually a big thing that we kind of iterated on, and didn't know immediately if we were going to be able to make it in or not, just because of like how nav would bake in a smaller space. And through some testing and some kind of proof of concept stuff we did, it turns out that they work. The combatants are able to navigate around in there without too much problems. Haru can get in there and navigate around. You know, if we use those same practices to keep the nav mesh as clean and flat as possible, and to kind of keep the spaces inside as clean as flat as possible as well.
When you said you used an internal suite of tools, did you create those suite of tools, or?
Yeah, Ian made it. So it's essentially this tool right here where you get this nav mesh support prefab, which has, you can kind of see there's like boxes and stuff, but this is like stuff that wasn't gelling with the nav mesh, or like weird places Haru could get to and stuff like that. And so you can kind of use the tool to go through and really tighten all that stuff up and make sure that the nav is working well with all the props we have that maybe that don't necessarily work well with the nav, like the shrines were an example, things like that. And so what you can do is it also has like kind of a scene suite, but basically I kind of show this. Yeah, you can do just a regular bake, which somehow is insanely fast with these scenes, even though they're super big. And so you can kind of see like you get some sort of weirder results. There's like this kind of stuff right here, and that's weird. And so then what you can kind of do is go through, and this thing has these points right here that specifies like, hey, this is a nav island that we want to keep. And just tell it to do its thing, it'll calculate, and then it has all of this like covering geometry to all of the places that we don't want nav, to kind of exclude it, to make sure that Haru's not trying to get up on these weird rocks or like get into all these weird spots.
And that geometry does not exist at runtime. It's only used when baking the nav mesh.
Just the tool. Yeah, and so then you can see if you go and rebake it, and then hide that, now we have, you know, our nice clean island down here and none of the extra kind of peripheral stuff, which just helped a ton in, you know, we have these big levels, there's a lot of chunks involved with them, and like tools like this that sort of automated the process just made it possible to actually deal with stuff at that scale. So that's definitely a really nifty one.
Yeah.
What about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Carol.
No, I just thought that was really cool. I'm like trying to think back, you know, I would think of like some of the ways that like a hobbyist or somebody that's a beginner would solve for this. And it's just so manual and labor intensive. And this is like such a great tool to create. It's really impressive.
Yeah, if you're trying to start off with something like this too, like, you know, just work on a smaller scale, because once you can figure out how to get all of this stuff working in one area, like starting to develop larger areas is a lot easier versus, you know, if you kind of start doing a big area and then you're like, okay, well, these boxes aren't working well. Would I use them everywhere? What do I do to kind of make that work? It's a little bit harder just because, the larger the scale, the more moving parts, the more things you kind of have to solve for, versus if you keep it really focused at the beginning, stuff like this pays off a little bit more.
Great advice. Yeah, and it's very specific to your own game and what your requirements are, right? With the example you gave us, like, you don't want Haru to get stuck in these little different pieces, so you have to do it a certain way. I would love to see the colliders for like the environment and how you.
So it's all prefab based. We have kind of the different buildings that are used in different places, and kind of all of the geo, all of that, and then specifically they have kind of these collider sets that end up interacting with like nav and actually stopping the player from walking through them and stuff like that. So it's pretty manual. Our 3D art team did a really good job of, it's all really performant. The LEDs are really aggressive. A lot of it's like baked together in pretty big chunks. A lot of these buildings were built out of like more modular pieces. So, you have like this wood panel set, and it's all separate pieces, which ends up costing more kind of on the back end. So baking it down and having it so that instead of that, it's like all of the walls are one piece, all of the roof, the roof's one piece, things like that just helped a ton for performance. And then also if you're using sort of the more simple colliders, like you have this whole collider object that's just one thing, it makes working with the nav a lot easier as well. Instead of having like all those little things, maybe sometimes this one's not marked correctly, so you have a little spot of nav going under there. The more kind of, again, the more moving pieces, the easier it is for things to, interact incorrectly.
How do you generate the shape for the collision that matches the shape of the house?
It's manual. So I believe our team did it in their modeling suite.
Yeah, and we're using mesh colliders all over the place. If I were to ask Unity for a feature, this is what it would be. I give you a mesh, I press a button, and it generates the collision primitives that match that mesh. So it would just use the primitives. I know that's a big ask.
But I understand why you want it to be optimized in that sense, right?
And that was a big thing too. Again, it kind of, a lot of this comes back to optimization, but like, how can we do this in sort of like the least expensive way possible? And for a lot of it, it's having a custom collider that's at like this is way less geo than the building, but still accurately represents like where everything is.
Do you actually think you could show us the actual like collision view? That would be great for everyone watching to see. I think you can see that in tools.
Tools. Where am I going?
I think maybe
I haven't used that view either. It's weird.
Are you talking about the physics debugger?
Yes, that's the one. Yes. Is that in?
So go to
Window.
Analysis, Physics Debugger.
Thank you.
I clicked
That was like
something,
other tools or Windows?
There we go. Windows.
And then all the way down, like 4/5 of the way, Analysis, I think.
Analysis.
Physics and then debugger. Physics Debugger. There you go.
And then the collision geometry at the bottom right, there's a little like pop-up.
Bam.
Boom.
Okay, cool.
Oh, great. I just love seeing this view.
Oh yeah, no worries. So a lot of the stuff, like trees and foliage and stuff, was kind of a specific problem too, because like, what do you a lot of the times we use it as like player blockers, so we put it on the edge of a space that we don't want people to move through. But like, do you do collisions for the cards? Do you do collisions for this? And like, our solution was definitely like kind of a, cover it and don't let people interact with it oddly. So you can see like the trees kind of have these big capsule colliders on them and things like that. Like, and things like the fire.
Those big colliders are really important for blocking vision, because without them, like, you can't see an archer because there are a bunch of leaves in the way. But that archer can see you. So we had to put these blockers just to block their line of sight.
Right. That's fair. That's just trying to be fair to the player, right?
Yeah. Foliage was a big one too, because that's funny, but the sight for the player is inherent in what you can actually see, so there's no additional logic in that. But for a really long time we had enemies that would see you through bushes and stuff like that if you weren't in stealth, which just felt really weird. So trying to come up with something, so we even, like, back to the physics layers thing, we even have a specific layer that's like the enemies can't see through, and so we can put that collision on that layer and say, hey, this is a piece of foliage, don't look through this. Made all that possible, and made, like, using that much foliage as blockers in different parts of the encounter possible.
Yes, thanks for showing that. I think we're gonna jump in and build a little encounter now.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go open. So we kind of talked earlier a little bit about sandboxes. Part of the process I like to use is I just have this sort of, like, module right here that's sort of like a sandbox blank that I can copy into different levels. If I want to make a new one, I can just Control S as a different scene and start working on it, which is just super helpful. It has all the encounter elements that I use: stealth volumes, climbables, grapples, Haru, all the equipment, like the destructible lanterns, things like that. And it kind of just gets all of it out in front of you. Like you have your little paint palette that you can kind of draw from. So it's just an easy way to kind of have it all organized in the scene. The same way with enemies, like it has a little checkpoint set up, and then enemies too, we kind of manage them through these things called spawn huts, which is basically just where you're allowed to point out all the enemies, give them behavior, do things like define how many enemies are in an encounter, and what type of enemies they are, their behavior, things like that. It's kind of, this is a little example of just like each of our different sort of enemies. We have sort of our archer, who's stationary, shoots at you, is a little bit more perceptive than some of the other patrollers. We have a really traditional Ashigaru, who just patrols around via these patrol points, which you can move around. And then you can also tell him, like, okay, here we want you to look at this wall, align your orientation, and then fix high, so make it look like you're fixing something. And that's what we do a lot to kind of root the NPCs in the environment and make them seem a little bit more interactive. Even though it's pretty superficial, but even them doing those little things that are kind of keys, like if you do that and then you have some, like a pile of ropes or some boxes over here, it does a lot to make it seem like they're existing in the space more. And then our samurai, who's like our armored combatant, who they're a little harder to kill, they have more health, and they're immune to certain weapons as well. So kind of using them as the more of the force behind the encounters is their kind of purpose. And so so we can kind of do a little mock-up. So a couple of enemies, how do we want to do it? We kind of, just as a side effect of having this demo out, we kind of have like some buildings to come in. What would be a cool way to come into this encounter? And so for a lot of it, our sort of philosophy with entering a space is that we want you to be safe, we want you to have good vision, and we want you to be able to tell, kind of for the most part, what's going to happen in the next encounter. So doing something like this where you're entering over something is really common. Entering and then having like the encounter out in front of you just, helps with navigation. The player knows that they're going towards the other side. They get to see that at the beginning. So when they drop down into the encounter, there's already kind of that inherent navigation. And then it also says like, okay, you get to plan your route out a little bit. And like we talked about earlier, is like really giving the player a bunch of avenues to tackle an encounter, and letting them kind of choose it on their own. So, kind of saying like, hey, we got checkpoint back over here, so now the player knows where they're going. This is kind of the exit. You can even kind of have like a little door, like light shining through it, or some kind of color value really gives it some pop, so you're like, okay, I'm going that way. And then beyond that, we want to kind of start thinking about enemy placement and maybe like where you can go. So if we have sort of this alleyway right here leading into the encounter, we don't really want you to go that way. It's not the stealth route, it's not something like that. So like, let's have an enemy block it. We'll have him stand over here, And then this is our stealth lantern. Let's have it kind of dissuade the player from going that way. So we'll have this guy here looking out the alleyway with the peril volume, which basically means like, hey, if the player goes this way, they're going to get spotted.
So just to clarify, stealth lantern, peril volume. What this means is we have these destructible lanterns in the environment. If you walk into their radius, it makes combatants notice you way easier. So we call that peril volume. It's kind of the opposite of a stealth volume.
Yeah, and so we don't want you to go this way. So now we got to kind of figure out like how we're going to lead the player up to this rooftop. Let's maybe not use a grapple point, and let's make them climb. So we'll make them climb to the top of this.
I had a question about that. So are there essentially 3 degrees of stealthiness? So like you're either not in a peril volume, in a peril volume, or in a stealth volume, right? There's nothing between that. You've simplified it to 3 degrees.
Yeah, effectively,
yeah. You're in like normal, stealth, or peril, basically.
And so especially like having the grass, which is really common in stealth games, and like a really good player leader. We can kind of say, hey, look, like we want you to be stealthy and go up to the ladder. So we can kind of do a little bit with the grass and say, hey, look, let's kind of push the player over here. Make it so that it's safe for them to get up here, and then so this is kind of saying, hey, look, you can go this way. That's there's a great way for you to get up on top of this, and then there's this guy over here. Cool. So now we have kind of the entrance. We have if this was like a real space, that's a road or something. It gives you this really good kind of routing element. But then now we've also developed one route that the player can take. Let's maybe give them another one. If they don't like that one, maybe they can kind of sneak back over here and get behind this box if they want. So then maybe there's another little avenue over there. We'll put some stealth grass over there so that they know about it. Cool. And then and then you can kind of keep thinking about like, okay, well, what would be neat? So let's maybe give access to the top of this, but maybe you gotta earn it. So let's either put a ladder at the back of this to let the player climb up there. If they want to go this entire route,
or some suggestions from the chat. Just throw in there, and it'll keep going. But chat, if you have a suggestion of something you want to throw in there,
what you want to see.
Let us know.
So this is something. Yeah, what's up?
One thing I wanted to mention real quick is perception hats. Perception hats is just the name we gave to the idea that these combatants can see way more things that are on their level vertically. So they can't really see much above them, which is why we call them perception hats. Just think they're wearing a sombrero with a really wide brim. And this is important because for that spider feel, you really want to be on those rooftops, and you want to be sneaking around, and you want to be safe up there. So like archers have a lot more perception. They're much more dangerous in that way. But Ashigaru, you see walking around on the ground, you should just be able to hang out above them and be safe.
Yeah, it's definitely, kind of going back to more of that Tenchu influence. It's like we have the stealth volumes, and like you mentioned, the states of being in stealth where your hands are invisible. We give you that feedback. You're in that volume. You're in the grass. You can't be seen. But there's kind of another state where you're up above things, and you're not actually in a stealth volume. Like we don't hide the player from the enemies, but like through a system other than their perception not allowing them to see up really. And so that gives us the ability to, like have this higher register of stealth, somewhere that the player is safe and, they're in their place of power, but without kind of having to do all of the additional markup support and without like being heavy handed. So again, if we wanted to do something later on, like have this archer look at this rooftop, so you have to kill him before you can get up there, we still have the ability to do that without, having some mechanical overlap there. Cool, yeah, so let's, I was gonna kind of add a grapple point here. Something we do a lot is like having grapple points on places, but they're only visible from certain angles. So like we don't want you to be able to skip this nice double setup that we just got by grappling up to this thing. But if you climb up here, you can now grapple across and kind of get to this spot over here. And then, that's kind of tricky. let's give him a pickup, something cool over here that kind of rewards the player for getting up there. Let's give him some shuriken, something cool. So we got this coming over here. Kind of place that kind of box height so the player can touch it with their hand easily. And there we go. Yeah, so now we kind of have the entrance for it. Kind of a couple different ways the player can go at the beginning. And we get him up on top of one of these two things. And so now we kind of have this guy sort of a motivation to get up here, but now we're up here and we're looking at the actual encounter. We're kind of looking at the space over here and we get to sort of decipher it. We want to put it together a little bit more. Right now, they're all facing the wrong way. Maybe we don't want to do that. We want to have a little bit of a stronger enemy presence here. Maybe this guy is actually kind of covering his buddies a little bit more. Maybe this guy is sort of standing guard there. And then, this guy's like patrolling around. We'll give him some boxes to fix when he's over here. And then we'll have him maybe come up and talk to this guy. And so again, it's sort of this, you have all of these base tools and you sort of just start like kind of jamming it out and figuring out sort of what's happening in the space. So cool, he's fixing that there. That's cool. And then he goes over and let's have him, let's see what other missions we got. They just kind of hang out together. So he'll do some standing idols. Awesome. So we kind of have a little space over here. So let's try to figure out like how the player can start getting sort of around these enemies now that they know where they are and that they can kind of see them. So, if you're up here, like, okay, what are we going to do? Probably some stealth grass, give the player a little bit more of an example of where they can go. So make it kind of easy for them to get behind these boxes. We don't want to make it too easy, so we want to maybe block them from going all the way through the encounter that way. So maybe they have to get back into the pipe there. Arrange in that way. Cool. So they could also have come this way. So maybe let's try to think about what they could do over here. Give them maybe some boxes to drop down. So again, it's kind of not stealth, but if you have something that people can be behind, it just sort of makes the enemies, makes it harder to see them, the player, I mean. So this thing. And cool, now you got this sort of little contained area over here where you're not in stealth, but it's harder for the enemies to see you.
And we actually have a crouch also, so crouching behind boxes is the thing.
Maybe block this off so that you can't sneak back through there. Cool. So we have kind of a starting spot and kind of know how we want the area to work. So now the most important part is let's try it. Just make sure that it's doing what we want it to. And so a lot of, especially putting together these encounters with how the enemy perception works and all that, is really just iteration. You play it. Actually, this guy can see you when you come through the door. That's not great. We want to adjust him, this, that, and the other. And so if you see again, you kind of got to rebake nav every time, moving stuff around. So remember to do that. Occlusion will probably look weird, but that's okay. So sweet. So we got our little blank here, and let's hop into that. Oops. Takes a little bit of time to spin up, but not nearly as much time as it takes to do a build and then transfer it over to the PSVR. So cool, now we're in it, we can kind of test this and sort of feel out how this encounter is working. So we walk in, there's our enemies come in, and cool, okay, so that guy's kind of starting to spot me, puts a little pressure on the player when they're coming out of the entrance. You're like, okay, cool, I'm in the encounter space, let's kind of start messing with it. I can kind of see that from here. That kind of lets me skip this. I might want to, change the positioning on that so you can't see it until you're up on this roof.
You already have some options. You can climb up.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so now we're up above. Uh-oh, so that archer's kind of tilted a little bit over towards me.
No.
He saw me. We probably want to adjust his orientation. Now he's going to attack me.
Oh.
Chat,
So those
chat
are-
said that Spencer made level design look so easy that it should be a crime.
Yeah,
Well, so, and that's part of it
let's
too.
make a
is, like,
level in 5 minutes.
yeah, so like we have all of these systems, and Peter kind of spent the first part of this session like talking about it. They're going to keep respawning forever too, so it's just a slaughter fest in here. But that we have all these tools, we have all this stuff that's already working, and you really just need to kind of find interesting ways to combine them and get the player to do what he wants, what they want or what they think they're able to do. And so, cool. So we got that. This is kind of neat. Actually, this is a cool side effect. I can jump on these boxes and jump up here. Nope, I can't. Oh, cool. So we probably want to adjust that down so I can jump on it because that's sweet. You can just jump on there. So you kind of do it a little bit organically like that. Coming up
Happy
here.
accident.
Yeah, little happy accidents. Cool. So actually, this is a sweet spot to go to. We kind of want to motivate people to get up here. And then, where would be a cool place to go from here? I kind of don't want to go that way. We kind of want to force people to go through the encounter more. So maybe let's figure out how to block this, give a little bit more motivation to go that way, and maybe put another bad guy in over there to give it a little bit more impact. So first thing we're going to do is this guy can see me when I'm on that rooftop. So we want to orient him so he's still covering his buddies over here, so that he can't see me when I'm up there, because that's our safe spot for the player. And then we want to turn this down from 50 to 4, because there's 4 bad guys, not 50 of them. That's just set up too, so if you have it like say if you kill this guy, you want him to be replaced, you can have him like spawn back over here and walk back out. So you can kind of give the pool a little bit more to draw from. But so here, and if you wanted to add another enemy, you can kind of go, okay, cool. Like we want this Ashigaru. Okay, let's add another enemy field. We want him to be this guy. We want him to spawn in the initial control point. And we don't want him to be a samurai. We want him to be an Ashigaru. So we want to grab the MV variant. Oops. Bam.
I noticed when we went up on the roof that Haru also showed up on top of the roof. So how's Haru actually got Haru teleport as well?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit later, but we have these markups. So like I was mentioning earlier, like she can get up here, but she can't get up here. If I turn this off, she won't be able to get up here either.
Okay.
And so that's how we can kind of define like, okay, maybe this is actually a bigger space, and you can maybe like come up over here. Oops. Come up over here, and like this is actually sort of a space you can get to, and maybe you can play around over here a little bit.
Does Haru have a logic where she'll generally hover around where you are? Like, 'cause, if levels are really big and really far ahead, she'll just generally hover in your.
Yeah, I think Peter touched on it a little bit earlier, but she kind of knows where you're going and does what she can to sort of stay in view, kind of in front of you, but off to the side. So she does that inherently and just, tries to kind of follow you around. It's partially just because it's, if you have a companion, it's a lot easier to know that if she's on screen. And the other part and kind of positive side effect of that as well is that it reminds the player that they have her as a tool to use. Because, if you get into it and you're sort of in combat, you kind of forget about it. But if she's there, like, oh, yeah, Haru, I can use her. Like, go get that guy. Or something like that, which ends up being really useful.
We also have some fail safes in case she just gets stuck or can't get to you. So if you approach a checkpoint, she'll just pop up to be with you again.
Yeah. So
Something else I wanted to mention real quick is we do daily play tests where we have a different member of the team play through a level, and we all just watch it. They stream it, and we all watch it. And what we see is that everyone on the team plays the game differently. And Spencer will be watching this, and Michelle will go somewhere weird, and we'll be like, oh, I love where Michelle just went. We need to make this a legit route. So yeah, just tons and tons of play testing and iteration. And it was important to us that every member of the team was playing, not just one.
Yeah, so kind of like we were talking about, let's get, this is a cool route. Let's get a little bit more motivation for the player to go over there. Maybe we got to move this down so it's a little easier to jump on from here. Maybe we give them another box too.
Yeah, that must be so great for you, Spencer, seeing everybody play the game every day and then just spawning all these ideas for
current
levels and future levels.
I mean, it's the only way the levels got to where they are, is just kind of that constant, different people hammering them. And like, again, we're trying to get all of these different options. So it's really interesting to see like what play style uses which, what ones are more obvious. And so, like we kind of have that same thing where like, okay, cool. Like we play tested this a couple times, like people only go this way. They almost never go this way. So, okay, well, let's, try to figure out a way to maybe make this more enticing. Or if it is supposed to be more hidden route, like make the route more powerful. So like, oh, fewer people use this one. Okay, like maybe it's really strong because there's another pickup back over here, something like that. So it really is very evolutionary in terms of, watching people interact with the space. Or like a lot of the times what happened a lot was like somebody would be playing it and they'd get somewhere and like, wow, I didn't even know you could get up there. We should put a pickup up there, or let's give some, let's reward you for exploring and like getting up there. So we want to do all that kind of stuff, and really make sure that it just feels like, if you are messing around and you're trying to get to some weird corner, maybe there's some goodies back there.
I just want to shout out that Lana Lux just rated the stream with a party of 280 people. So we have 280 new viewers.
Nice.
Thank you so much, Lana.
Welcome.
Lana is an incredible Unity streamer and game developer. Check out her channel, Lana Lux, on Twitch. Thank you so much for rating us. So for everyone who's joining, we're actually looking at the incredible VR game Arashi, Castles of Sin. The game was just released about 2 weeks ago. That's right. And we're looking in editor. We're looking at the movement and combat of the game, a few other things, and now we're building a level together. We're building a stealth encounter together that we're about to play through. So welcome everyone again. Thank you, Lana. You may continue, Spencer and Peter.
Oh yeah.
The new audience.
Hey Spencer, before you get back into it, just one more thing I wanted to say about the playtests, which was because we're all on this call together, even though pandemic has us all separated, and we're all watching someone play, it's a great time to talk to each other and ask questions. And I know I benefited from things where I could say, hey, I'm struggling with this design. Haru is able to kill a samurai when she pins them. It's too easy. And then someone on the team will be like, I have a great idea. And we get a lot of progress just by talking it through and everyone, throwing out ideas.
Yeah, that was definitely crucial to the whole process. It's just like, and like things like this, kind of this setup is really valuable too, because you just want to get it as quickly as possible to people playing. And that gives you more cycles to see, where the potential is, where the fun is, and really kind of find that and, jump on it and really highlight it as much as you can.
And I love that you were doing it daily because, not just for, I'm sure it wasn't just for refining the levels themselves, but that sounds like a team building exercise too, right? Like, hey, we're going to take some time every day to get together and some time together over voice chat. And I'm sure other things came up, not just things on the levels.
I would say everyone in every discipline knows this game inside and out. And I don't think I've ever experienced that before. Normally we're kind of siloed, but yeah, everyone knows everything.
Yeah.
So what's one big piece of advice you would give to teams working from home, working remotely together, trying to release a game?
I mean, we do daily stand-ups, and we try to have our faces visible on those. Not always, because it's in the morning, and but so that's one thing. We used OneNote a lot for documenting things. I actually found I was not using email very much as compared to what I would normally be doing. We use Slack a lot. We use Discord. In fact, we would do our daily playtests streaming over Discord.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely something like doing daily playtests. It helps. I mean, we're kind of specifically talking about the levels, but really helps you refine everything and like kind of keeps each discipline more responsible to like the current state of things. Because if you have somebody playing through and pickups aren't working, like that's a pretty glaring issue. We know we need to jump on that versus like if we have something where like kind of some, I don't know, something more minor, like the stealth grass looks weird, it's wiggling the wrong way. You might think that's a big issue until you get to the playtest, and the only thing that's coming up during the playtest is that the pickups aren't working, and you're like, okay, we got to fix the pickups. Like that's really important. The grass wiggling, like nobody even noticed, doesn't matter. So it really helps you like focus on the correct things, and then also like you mentioned, it's just a huge team building thing. Like everybody's together, we're talking about the game. Like, oh, they just the enemies just got this new animation in. Oh, it looks so cool. Like, and you can kind of talk about it, and the guys from animation are on there, so you can talk to them about what it is, how it's working, give really accurate, really specific feedback because you're actively looking at whatever the work is. That just like the value of that, I don't think can be overstated. It was really important to our development.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I think so many of your members of your team have shown up separately. Cove of Mattis, which I think is Michelle, the level art designer, is here as well. Yeah. So if you hear Michelle, do you have any tips or anything to add?
Michelle is responsible for solving so many of my my tough design challenges because we would be in the playtest and she would just bam solve it. Thank you. So that's another a great benefit of everyone doing that playtest together. We also did triage twice a week where we would go through all of our bugs. For the last few months of the project, we would do it every day.
Wow,
but
that
just
is
have
really
a team,
impressive, actually.
just having a team discussing the bugs, deciding what we need to fix and when. It was really and that also just like keeps top of mind what are the hot bugs that we need to fix next.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. So I guess this stuff's kind of working. We kind of want to develop out this little space past here a little bit more. So what do we want going on over here? So you kind of drop down in here, you're kind of coming this way, or you're sort of on top of this spot over here. You've kind of been up high the whole level. Let's maybe not give them a top space to get through this next one. Let's maybe give them some stealth grass to go through over here. And maybe remove this so they can get over in this corner. But we're also, I put a lantern here, so you'll get detected if you come around here. So you can come back over here, you can get the health, but you're going to have to figure out what to do about these enemies kind of before progressing. And then some stealth grass over there. You put like a little wall, something to kind of block out these guys so you can get behind them. And then maybe something that actually motivates the player to come over here, give them some. Let's grab some grenades. Okay, cool. So now maybe they're over here, and you can kind of get behind them. So yeah, let's see. Let's toss it on and see if all this stuff's doing what we want it to.
Level is looking legit.
Yeah, they kind of could come together pretty quickly.
Yeah. We're gonna play through this now.
Oh yeah, I just gotta save it, which sometimes takes a second. And then big app. And so a little bit about workflow too is like right now we're kind of working on one specific thing, but if you can see there's like a bit of friction every time we want to spin it up. So a lot of the times when I'm doing gray boxing, what I'll do is I'll actually have a bunch of encounters being gray boxed at the same time. So every time I have to go through this process of saving, remaking all the stuff, when I actually hop into the editor, I can play through multiple encounters at once, which just kind of reduces the amount of friction that goes into the actual development of it. So, if you have, imagine a big space like this, but there's 3 doors and each one leads into a different encounter. In that same play session, I can go through, play all 3 of them, kind of write down the notes of what I want to tackle, and kind of address them all in a bit more of a batch, which ends up kind of helping. And the other thing that's kind of nice about that too is it's like, okay, well, say we kind of like, we really like the entrance of this encounter, but we're not really feeling like the end of it. You can just take this, duplicate it 2 or 3 times, and then change the end of the encounter a couple different ways, play through it and be like, okay, well, I like how this one's working. But this one version of it doesn't have this part as good, and you kind of mess with them independently, and you can kind of figure out what's working best in each version, and then combine them all back down into one encounter and get the benefit of going through like a lot of iteration really quickly. And the other positive side effect of that is it's non-destructive as well. So you can have all of these things kind of arrayed, mess with them as much as you want, and then you're like, oh wait, but actually that part over there was working better. You still have it there. You can kind of go back over to it and use it.
So when you have these variations, do you have a way to like teleport to the next one, or do you have to exit play mode and then
no, I actually use the grapple hooks. So like I have levels like this, and I'll just like, oh, okay, so there's, say there's another module like right here, and I'm grayboxing another level like right over there. I'll just take a grapple point and like put it on the wall in between the 2 encounters. You just use that to grapple up and go in between them. So I mean, there's so much stuff that's already like
in-game weapons as a debug.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah, and the grapple points are a big one too, because especially like throughout design, like there's some of them. Kind of one of the design tenets we have is we don't want a grapple point on the back of an encounter, because if it's at the end, you can grapple through the whole thing and you skip it. So we want the grapple points, like I said, kind of obscured from the beginning, but really they're focused in the middle of the encounter to allow you to go back and forth, to get up on top of stuff, things like that. Versus, if you just put one at the end, you can skip the whole encounter. Now, that being said, during development, sometimes we'll leave a grapple point at the end because you want to skip through that encounter because you're actually working on something later in the level. So it is kind of funny that as a side effect, we ended up using the grapple as sort of a debug tool. And there were a lot of like, sort of really kind of cheesy, quick ways to get through the level that we kind of left in until the very end, because if you're trying to test something at the end of the level, it's a little bit easier to kind of like switch.
It reminds me of another game we were doing a stream with Greek Memories of Azure, where they also had a weapon that they turned into a debug tool, where they turned their bow and arrow and had it so that you could shoot the arrow and then teleport to wherever the arrow was. So they would really quickly wanted to do something up high. They would just so the recurring theme.
Nice.
Definitely a lot of movement stuff. Yeah. So cool. We'll hop in and see if this is how we want.
That's another point about Unity. It's a great thing. Like, we have these weapons, but I can add a script to the arrow that makes it teleport me to wherever it hits. It's so easy to just make a small change or addition just by throwing a script on it. And we all write our own scripts, and then we make messes and our actual engineers have to clean them up. But it allows for really fast iteration.
That's great for
Nice. Michelle just said, Spencer actually showed me a cool trick to copy our hard loads in the local Unity scene to skip the one change late in the level that actually want to look at.
So like I said, we kind of have those hard loads. So it's basically like that that graphic that shows up in front of the doors. And when you interact with it, it loads you to a hard load. The levels are pretty long. So if you want to go test something like on the very last section, initially we didn't have a great way to do that. We kind of have like a way in the debug tools to kind of go to different checkpoints in the level. I can't remember exactly where it lives, but basically, so this has like the checkpoints in the level, but we didn't always have that. So what we would do is we would just copy the hard load from the end of the level and put it right next to the spawn point, and you would just walk into it and be at the end of the level, and it would actually like hook into all the parts of the point and work correctly. Which is a funny workaround.
Yeah, very good trick. Perfect.
So let's play through the scene and get to the end.
Yeah, so we awesome. So that guy can't see us over here. The sight line's looking good. We got our nice safe position up here. We can kind of see stuff. Like now we got, okay, cool. Like I got to go over there. There's some goodies over there and right there that I want to get to, so I don't want to skip that. Okay, cool. Let's grapple over here. And again, like that verticality and like going back and forth on top of rooftops is just so essential to the ninja feel, that anything where you can get up on top of something or jump around or do any of that stuff, like we want to make that as easy as possible. And kind of like I was talking to, like Haru, she knows she can get up here, but she can't get on top of that rooftop, for instance. So like we can kind of mark stuff where, hey, you know, this is sort of actually, like, this isn't a great example because she works best in more open spaces. So, like, having this be narrow, like, maybe we wouldn't want to let her come up here. It'd be easier if she hung out on the ground. And plus, most of the enemies in this encounter are on the ground. So you would want her down there so you can, you know, do things with her to kind of interact and stuff. But cool. And so now we got these boxes. Oh, that's awesome. I can jump on the boxes to get behind this archer. That's sweet. That's what we wanted. Cool. So, bam, and now we got kind of these three guys. Okay, well they're sort of looking this way, but I want that stuff over there. So maybe let's get them out of the way. Distract them real quick with Haru. That guy looks like he maybe doesn't have nav, or maybe I copied the archer or something. So
he might have been just outside of Haru's distract range also.
Okay, so they're out of the way now, so we can run back over here. Occlusion's gonna freak out because I didn't bake it. Okay, so like maybe there's a better way to get behind this dude. Like I need a little bit more infrastructure over here.
Oh, you've been made.
They got me. Oh no. Smoke bomb. And so actually that was another thing that came out of playtesting as well, is initially the smoke bomb kind of worked the same way that the other grenades work, where you throw it, it kind of has a fuse. But it's actually an awesome ninja tool when you can chuck it at the ground and use it, you know, like the smoke bomb, you know, like the smoke flash, ninja flash, whatever. So now we have it, and it's this great extra tool where, yeah, it's also like you can chuck it and disable enemies at range, but it's also like a great, oh man, I'm surrounded, I need to get out of here. You can chuck a smoke bomb at the ground and hop out. So now we kind of.
I just wanted to say also, like right now, our samurai are immune to that. They'll just cough, but they'll be able to attack you. After releasing the game, we were like, don't like that. We should make them be affected by it too. So like that's the kind of thing where we can release a rapid patch and change some gameplay, just because we thought maybe we liked it better the other way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it keeps everything nice and iterative. Cool. So yeah, kind of dealt with the encounter, killed everybody, and now we're all set to go to the next zone. Yeah, you know, and then that's kind of the whole process. We kind of just keep doing that. Like maybe, yeah, like I said, maybe we need some more stuff to support some stealth back over here. Maybe it's actually more interesting if the exit's here instead to kind of force you through this area. It makes the shape of the space a little bit more interesting. So, you know, let's move that here.
I love that. So we essentially just had a little like mini Let's Dev on top of the interview. I got to build along with you. Thank you so much for showing us that. That was so much fun to actually see. And I feel like we've got an even greater understanding of your game. Like you walked through things earlier, but it's different when you actually implement things, when you actually do it, right? Yeah. I really started to understand the way you've set up like Haru's movement throughout the scene, why you make certain decisions, how you come to certain decisions, and the happy accidents that you come across. It's all great to see.
Yeah, I think we were really spoiled to hear you actually think it out loud as well.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm happy to show it.
Somebody in chat said this is like we're diving into the minds of the designers, and I think we really did. I'd love to wrap up just by talking about like the prototyping and the asset store and how you use that in your project. I mean, since we're here doing iterations and doing prototyping, when your game looked more like this, when it was at the earlier stages, I believe you said you used a lot of things from the asset store?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, even before we started production on Arashi, the game that you're playing now, we made some pitch demos and that kind of stuff. So we had several demos that we had built beforehand. One of them was very representational of what Arashi ended up being, but these were all built with heavily leveraging asset store. So we get a ninja model off the asset store, get a set of movement animations, get a set of attack animations. We used the Mulber's animation Polygon Fox package to prototype Haru. And basically the idea is we get something representative off of the asset store, we build our stuff and test using that, and then we replace it with the content that we generate ourselves once it's functional enough. And that really allowed us to focus on making all of our assets unique without blocking development while those assets are being created.
Yeah, and like I was saying earlier, the faster you can get to something being representational or playable, the faster you can get real feedback on it. So being able to use all that stuff and leverage it for prototyping just allows you to get to actually like the actual game a lot faster, and like working on the actual things and making more impactful decisions, because there's a lot you can do thinking about it, but actually playing it, and especially in VR, actually feeling it, it just makes a huge difference and really just allows you to make a lot more of the correct design decisions along the way.
Yeah, and a lot of those aspects are actually, those assets in general are very good as well. I mean, your team didn't end up, I don't think, really using any of them in production, but I mean, we very often see teams here end up tweaking them. It's not perfect out of the box, but we talk about this in some ways, just being allowing that to have a placeholder. And if you have a great team, they're really able to tweak it so it fits in with your game really well.
Also, just there's work that you need to have some of these assets in order to do it, like building an animator controller. And so just having representational assets allows us to do all of that work. And then when it's time to drop in replacements, everything's already set up. So it's great workflow. We really heavily leveraged it.
Perfect. Thank you. You showed us so much. There's a lot of content here. You really stuck around for a long time. I think we're starting to build a tradition of our stream where we invite our guests over for an hour and we end up sneakily convincing them to stay much longer. But we really appreciate it. And thank you both for coming by. Thank you for the entire Endeavor team that was in chat, like throwing in little tidbits here and there. That was really awesome. We got a lot of people watching. I hope everyone really enjoyed it. Tomorrow, we're going to be checking out our final game for VR Week. It's going to be Zenith, The Last City, with Andy and Lauren. So if you guys want to check out how you make a massive MMO RPG in VR, come check us out tomorrow. But yeah, thank you once again to Endeavor One.
Thank you so much for having us. Yep. This was a really cool experience. I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. This was like definitely a very unique stream for us as well. I don't think we've done this where we got the chance to like actually do level design along with you. That was fun for us. So yeah, thanks for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone in chat for joining and all your awesome questions and everything. We'll see you. Make sure you download the game.
And join us for our stream tomorrow. That's right. With Zenith VR around the same time tomorrow on Twitch.
Awesome. Bye.
See you. Ciao.